In the original novel, Raelle is the beloved heroine, while her supposed friend Yunifer Magnolia plays the role of the jealous Villainess. The story follows the villainess Yunifer, who bears a one-sided love for the hero Ishid. However, Ishid loves Raelle. Driven by jealousy, she torments Raelle until Cassian, the secondary male lead, kills her. That was Yunifer's tragic fate, until a regular girl from the modern world wakes up, screams at her reflection, and realizes she has inhabited the villainess's body. Fortunately, she arrives on a pivotal day, the entrance ceremony for the Empire of Rovatia's National Academy of Magic. In this world, magic is governed by 4 elements: fire, water, wind, and earth. At 16, every mage is required to enroll, and this academy is the exact location where Raelle and Yunifer were destined to meet. But the main character is determined to escape out of this story. So, let the story begin. The story opens with the sound of rain falling. Yunifer is awakened by it. She is a little surprised at the sudden change in weather. She snuggles inside her blanket in slight discomfort at the noise. As she reluctantly tries to get up to shut the window, she sits back down, groaning with a sudden ache. Her head is throbbing in pain. She recollects the events at last night's party, the delicacies at the table, the handsome company, and the drinks. She realizes that she had gotten quite drunk, but is relieved to have made it safely to bed, only to suddenly glance at the numerous bruises on her skin. She wonders if they're bug bites. They're all over her neck, breasts, and so on. She is puzzled. Suddenly, she jolts before the mirror. She realizes it must have been quite the romp last night. Her head is still throbbing. The sound of water splashing breaks her out of her reverie. She realizes she was awakened by the sounds of her one-night stand taking a shower and not the rain. She snuggles back inside the blanket, wondering if she should leave before he comes out, but finally decides against it. Besides, her head still hurts. The events of last night keep flashing before her eyes. She had remarked how his eyes shone when he was excited, how his face was so pretty, and how he would look prettier when he cried. Yunifer gasps. She can hardly believe she rode him last night. She thinks she must be out of her mind, but she quickly pacifies herself. After all, he is strikingly beautiful. Suddenly, Ishid calls her out. He has a towel wrapped around his waist. Water is dripping from all over the muscles in his body. He is casually drying his dark hair with another towel. Yunifer quickly collects herself as she is greeted by that pretty face that made her lose control last night. She is no longer surprised at how she flirted with him while she was drunk. She finds him familiar and thinks about where she had seen him before. He takes her by surprise by leaning in too close and asking if she's all right, because he had heard her moaning in her sleep. Yunifer blushes a beet red as the mystery man plants a firm kiss on her lips. She drowns herself in the kiss. Their tongues collide. His fingers swiftly slide across her thighs, and she suddenly opens her eyes in a horrifying realization. Placing her hands on her chest, pushing him away, she peeks at him, cautiously. He apologizes. He says that he forgot she must have been exhausted. She mentally corrects him because she liked the making out part. But wait, she shakes her head firmly. That's not important. The man is none other than Ishid himself. He plants a gentle kiss on her cheek and looks at her lovingly. She is still in a state of disbelief. Is that really Ishid? The Ishid Lucrenze? The male lead she had tried so hard to avoid? She squeezes the bedsheets, trying to calm herself. It is not too late to escape. After all, it had been just one night. All she has to say is a goodbye. She loudly exclaims that they forget the events of last night. Ishid is taken aback. She reiterates and tells him to forget the events of last night as a mistake. She asks him to pretend to not know her if they run into each other. Ishid is left frozen in shock. She mumbles a final apology and tells him she has to do this because her life is on the line. She bids him a goodbye and turns to walk away. Finally, Ishid moves to ask her if she doesn't remember what she had said, after he had told her that he usually doesn't do this. The events of last night flash before her eyes again. At the party, he told her he is not normally into one-night stands. She told him to make this their day one. He was confused. She nodded and told him that starting from that very moment, they were dating now. She grabbed his chin and leaned in for a kiss, telling him he won't mind anymore since they're lovers now. These memories make Yunifer gasp in horror. First, she had tried to initiate a one-night stand with someone not into it. Then she had coaxed them, telling them it's fine because they can be lovers now. He believes her and lets her have his way with her. The next morning, she tells him it was an accident and that he should just forget about it. She holds her head in frustration. But she cannot afford to end up like Yunifer in the book. She struggles to form a sentence. She finally gathers the courage and sheepishly tells him that she doesn't remember last night. Wait. She again realizes it probably sounds even worse, and doesn't even make any sense, because she had just asked him to forget about last night, and now she is saying she herself doesn't remember any of it. She grows anxious. He must be furious. She swallows a lump in her throat. His face is unreadable. She starts rambling, only to be interrupted by his composed voice. He says he understands. She gasps in relief. He understands. He looks at her with a gentle smile. He reassures her that it is understandable since she was heavily intoxicated last night. In fact, he thinks he should have been more considerate. He remarks how he should have known better. Her eyes sparkle in gratitude. He is so big-hearted. He really understands. She quickly explains that she was too drunk last night to even tell her right foot from her left, and says that it was her fault too. As she is about to apologize once again, she is cut short by him suggesting that they do it once again. Now she is the one confused. Do what again? He smiles and says to do everything she had forgotten. His piercing green eyes meet her icy blue ones. A sweaty Yunifer stammers in disbelief. Ishid assures her he remembers every detail of last night and holds her hand while saying that there is no better time than present to revisit those memories. He pulls her close and narrates how they met out on the terrace last night when she suddenly came up to him and kissed him. This shocks Yunifer, but then those memories come flashing before her eyes. She audibly gasped at him, saying that she had never seen anyone like him before. But then again, he was vaguely familiar. Ishid was visibly a little uncomfortable. She cupped his face. He gently removed her hand, saying that she seemed to be quite intoxicated. But Yunifer insisted otherwise and giggled. She looked at him with sparkling eyes and flirted with him by complimenting his scent. She rambled on and on about his scent. He suddenly removed her hand and said he would find someone to help her. As he turned to leave, she grabbed his hand. He was startled. She pushed him down, roughly grabbed his face and jumped in for a kiss, biting his lower lip. Back in the present, Ishid began narrating the story about how she asked for his name and insisted on not being drunk, and how she flirted with him. He traces her lips with his fingers, and Yunifer is startled. She covers his mouth with her hands and insists they recap differently, in a more intellectual way, like they are philosophers. Ishid's eyes soften at her. He drapes the blanket like a red cloak over her, ties a knot at her neck, places her hands gently on his shoulders and says they will talk. The scene cuts to Yunifer on the sofa while Ishid is in the kitchen. She is nervous, but her eyes are determined. She wonders if she should just make a run for it. However, Ishid's voice breaks her out of her thoughts. He places a cup of tea on the table and asks her to help herself. They sit opposite each other. While she is drinking from the cup, he entangles her free hand with his, providing some warmth because he has noticed how cold her hands are. He remarks how cool her hands feel even in this hot summer. He wonders out loud if all water mages feel this way. Yunifer pauses at the question. She just remembered that Ishid is an extremely powerful mage. He was born with particularly abundant mana, which made his body temperature so high that even a slight increase in the temperature of his heart could kill him. Since birth, his heart has been on fire. Yunifer thinks that even if he has gotten used to the heat, it must still be uncomfortable. Even though Yunifer was not born with such a high amount of mana, she still feels as if frost falls over her heart every winter. She cannot wrench her hand away as she feels sorry for Ishid. She thinks about how he needs water. She explains that water mages have colder bodies, just as his is hot. She adds that even though her own body is not much cooler than average, she has an alumna who is a powerful water mage and would feel really cold to touch. Yunifer thinks of Reincarnated, a powerful water mage who is the water that Ishid needs. His heart would be at peace once he meets her, thought Yunifer. She proposed to set Ishid up with her. She thinks about how she doesn't want to meet Raelle, so she decides to write to her instead. Ishid tells her that though Yunifer is the first water mage he has held hands with, it is not like there are no other water mages at White Knight. Yunifer searches for an answer to that. She stammers and then argues that Raelle is different, which he would feel too when he meets her. But Ishid asks her why he should meet someone else. Yunifer is frustrated. How would she explain to him that it is because he is the hero and Raelle is the heroine? That would sound crazy. So she says that since he's the most powerful fire mage, Raelle would be the perfect water mage for him. Ishid passes on the offer. This frustrates Yunifer even more. She clenches her jaw, realizing that even though Raelle is the only one who can make his nightmares go away, she cannot reveal that to him. Ishid looks up at her, completely unaware. He gently requests her to sit down. She is flustered, realizing that she had stood up in excitement. She sits back on the sofa, she adjusts the cushion and looks away in embarrassment. She softly asks him why he does not want to see her. He tells her that he has never heard of her, and it is not her that he wants. Yunifer tries to interrupt, but he goes on. He tells her that she is the person he wants. His face is determined, while hers goes stunned in silence. Yunifer knows that the man sitting before her is no longer just made of paper, but is a living, breathing creature. She cannot hurt him anymore. She clenches her fists. He asks her if she dislikes him. Yunifer looks up at him. She struggles to frame an answer. She finally states that she neither dislikes nor likes him. She knows it is dangerous to get close to him. Ishid solemnly says that even though last night may have been a mistake for Yunifer, it wasn't the case for him. He wanted to know her more and asked her if that would be selfish. Yunifer stammers again. He states that if she finds him disgusting and repulsive, he cannot make her stay. He tells her that his feelings are genuine, but if she finds him too disagreeable, then she should leave him, and... Yunifer springs up from her seat and covers his mouth before he can finish his sentence. She looks down thoughtfully and gently removes her hand. She apologizes, saying that she is sorry for being a scumbag. Ishid tries to interrupt her, but she covers his mouth with her hands once again. She reiterates that she is indeed a scumbag. She encourages him to be firm and not be too kind for his own sake, especially when he has been wronged. She tells him to not let people walk all over him, and suddenly realizes something. It is the summer of 1189, a year before Ishid and Raelle are supposed to meet each other. She knows that Ishid is not the type to be vengeful to an ex, so perhaps she could break up with him before he falls in love with Raelle. After all, the main cause of her death comes from Raelle and Cassian's relationship, so Ishid is safe. Cassian would not kill her as long as she did not bully Raelle. So all she has to do is move away from Ishid's life before he falls for Raelle. That means she has at least a full 10 months in hand, Yunifer thinks as she glugs down the tea with determination. She thinks while they're dating, she can too soothe his nightmares by cooling him down and enjoy his amazing body. She slams the cup on the table and asks him if they can begin a serious relationship. Ishid beams with joy. He says it is not even a question. She reframes her question as a statement. Ishid beams in agreement. He looks at her softly. She looks down shyly, while he entangles his fingers with hers once again. He leans in close and tells her he was about to say something more earlier. She is a little surprised and asks him what it is. He says he can only give her one chance and requests her to keep that in mind for both her sake and his. Yunifer is confused and is left with questions. The scene cuts to a new day. Yunifer asks Ishid if he is having another day off. Ishid feels caught. He says he couldn't leave her alone while she slept. Yunifer doesn't believe his excuse and points out he didn't leave even after she woke up. Ishid finally states that he could not leave her alone. He is serious. Yunifer realizes it is not his day off indeed. She looks at the clock and points out that he is super late. The story cuts to Yunifer waving goodbye to Ishid's carriage at the gate of her house. Back in her room, she flops on the bed. She thinks how he must be late for work for the first time in his life only because he had insisted on dropping her home first. Her maid Rosie cautiously asks if she is all right. Yunifer apologizes for not informing her that she would be staying the night out. Rosie tells her that she was really worried for her, and then asks her if she is in pain. Flashes of Ishid opening his shirt while hovering over her flood Yunifer's brain. She was looking at him with such wonder. She mumbles how hot and big, and Rosie interrupts her asking, what is so hot and big? Yunifer manages to save the day by saying that she was talking about the sun. Then she asks Rosie to bring her birth control. Rosie is startled. She scurries away while Yunifer thinks about how adorable she is. She thinks she should have told Rosie to not inform her father, but then thought to herself that it was not necessary. After all, she didn't have much contact with Yunifer's father since she was sent to the academy soon after she found out herself in this body. Her thoughts change direction as she thinks how Ishid would be her first boyfriend in 7 years. She ponders upon how Ishid is virtuous, chaste, lovable, and totally her type. She realizes she needs to spice things up. She thinks she should text him. The empty pages and ink stare back at her. She is focused. She tries to write a few lines, but cringes at herself. She crumples the paper in frustration and tries again, only to toss it away once again, and again and again. The crumpled pieces of paper lie on the ground. A frustrated Yunifer misses her smartphone. Suddenly, she screams in horror that she has the romantic dysfunction, startling an incoming innocent Rosie. Rosie brings the birth control for Yunifer. Yunifer sips on the drink. She is disgusted by its bitter flavor. Rosie offers a bonbon to go with it, which Yunifer gladly accepts. She also brings a letter for Yunifer. A bird had brought it in his beak a short while ago. It had a seal of a roaring lion with a bird in flight. Along with the letter, there was also a slightly heavy pouch. It seems a bit too heavy to be carried by a bird. Rosie tells her that the bird was as big as her. Yunifer realizes it was the huge pet bird that belonged to Ishid in the book. Yunifer bids Rosie goodnight and asks her to rest. She shuts the door to her room and cozies up on her bed. She begins reading the letter. It bore his name and asked her how she was feeling. He said that since she liked the touch of her hands, he had sent something similar in the pouch. She is surprised. She pulls the string of the pouch and finds Ishid's mana crystal inside. The letter asked her to rub it on her lower back or abdomen and told her that the activation code is simply the word Ishid. She smiles at his choice of activation code. She speaks the activation code out loud and is surprised pleasantly as she is filled with warm light. The letter apologized for causing her discomfort on a hot day and asked her to let him redeem himself by inviting her to his home any day she feels convenient. Yunifer thinks that just as her house is heated, Ishid's place must be kept well cooled. She convinces herself that he has no impure intentions behind asking her to pay a visit. She marvels at his innocence and suddenly stops to realize there's more. There was also a whistle that could summon his bird, Raelle. He wanted to hear back from her directly through the bird. Yunifer bangs her head on her bed in frustration at the Herculean task of writing back to him. Her hands tremble as she gushes about him being so adorable. She summons the bird with the whistle and waits unsurely. As she approaches the windowsill, she is shocked by the size of the bird and its claws. She realizes that Rosie was not exaggerating. The bird is majestic. Yunifer swallows a lump in her throat. She calls out its name cautiously. The bird tilts its head with a questioning look. She realizes the bird understands her and gently strokes her neck. Suddenly, the bird extends its claws. Yunifer is taken aback and steps back, only to see there was something dangling from the bird's claw. She realizes it was meant for her. There is another letter and a pouch. The bird knocks at her fingers with its beak, prompting her to open her palm, which had the old whistle inside. Yunifer is confused, and even more so when the bird begins pecking at that whistle. Then the bird takes a flight outside. Yunifer realizes it's waiting outside. She looks at the broken whistle and realizes it had one use only. The letter contains instructions to lie on a bed in a comfortable position and bend knees slightly. Yunifer does as it says. She spreads knees shoulder width and supports her buttocks with a pillow. Then she is asked to generously coat ointment on her fingers and to apply them. Yunifer blushes. She slaps the letter on the bed and is angry in embarrassment. But suddenly, she rethinks and decides to not take it the wrong way, as even though it sounds lewd, Ishid is very innocent. Her attention is suddenly drawn to the ointment that came in the pouch. She smiles at his handwriting on the little container and wondered where he had gotten this from. The story cuts to a scene at a different building where Yunifer is back to work as she has recovered fast, thanks to Ishid's mana and ointment. A colleague named Martha greets her. Yunifer asks her about updates. Martha said there were no serious cases, as everyone must have known that Yunifer wouldn't be available. She confessed that she was both relieved and a bit disappointed. Yunifer smiles, sheepishly. After graduating from the academy, Yunifer chose to become a healer. She reminds Martha of a serious case they had last month, where they had to work overtime and do surgery early morning. It was a miracle that neither of them collapsed. Martha realizes she should not take her quiet hours for granted, and the two healers part ways to work. Yunifer looks outside the window and wonders if it would just be another ordinary day. Yunifer pats a little girl's leg with her healing hands and asks her to take care of herself. The girl bids her an enthusiastic goodbye. Suddenly, Yunifer hears a slamming noise. Two men bring a third injured man. She asks what had happened. She observes carefully and notices that the injured man's skin appears abnormally flushed, with traces of vomit near his mouth. She asks his companions when it began and checks his temperature by touching the back of his neck. She is taken aback by his high temperature and calls Martha for help as the patient has suffered a heat stroke. She places a hand on his body and begins immediate treatment. Martha keeps checking his temperature and finally realizes he has reached optimal temperature. She commends Yunifer and asks her to take a break. Suddenly, they are taken aback by another sound. Yunifer is horrified to see a bloody dagger still piercing a man on a bed on wheels. The man keeps struggling. So Yunifer decides to calm him down by casting a sleep spell. The man falls asleep instantly. Martha is confused about how to get the dagger out without further damage. Yunifer asks her to call a wind mage who could slice it out, but Martha says that it would take a few more minutes. Yunifer knows she must act swiftly as the patient begins coughing up blood. She realizes he is going into shock and that she must do something herself. She recollects reading about water amputations and is determined with a plan. Martha is puzzled. Suddenly, there's a cracking sound and Martha commends her for successfully cutting through the dagger and getting it out. Next, Yunifer decides to cast the healing spell. The wound begins to heal. Yunifer sighs in relief and sits down in exhaustion as Martha commends her once again. Yunifer thanks her. The scene cuts to a stack of paperwork on Yunifer's desk. Yunifer is happy to have completed everything and excited to go home. However, Martha comes in with news of more work, much to her horror. 10 minutes later, an exhausted Yunifer sits in a carriage. As the water mage in charge of the dam forgot to move the excess water and was unavailable at that moment, Yunifer had been called to fix the issue. She curses the mage who had been responsible for it. Suddenly, the carriage stops and she is called outside. People request that she hurry, as it is urgent. Yunifer gasps at the scene. Yunifer is shocked to see that Raelle is the mage responsible for the whole fiasco, but she knows that punishing or bullying Raelle could get her killed by Cassian. She swallows a lump in her throat. Raelle asks her if she is the one who lowered the dam's water level. She joins her hands in guilt and apologizes to Yunifer. Yunifer is taken aback and notices her swollen eye bags. She realizes that it was about time in the novel where Cassian begins openly cheating on Raelle. She understands that Raelle must have forgotten her duty while crying over that. She knows that Cassian will only grow worse from here, which would make Raelle suffer more. But she quickly collects herself with the fact that her behavior cannot be excused, because a lot of people might have gotten hurt today. She reprimands Raelle for her utter negligence and tells her how people might have died because of that. Raelle accepts her mistake and apologizes again. She goes on to apologize before the public as well. Yunifer feels bad for her and tells her she would have felt worse had the people been injured, while walking away. Raelle rushes to stop Yunifer and fumbles in her pocket for a few moments to bring out a handkerchief and begins wiping the blood from the side of Yunifer's face, noticing that the latter must have rushed from the hospital in a hurry. Yunifer sees that Raelle looks tired. She thinks it is not too late to introduce her to Ishid, but then thinks back to Ishid's words on how there are many water mages in White Night. But then again, she hesitates because her interference may ruin their story. And since she's not even Raelle's friend, she cannot advise her to ditch the psycho Cassian and find a better man. Yunifer ponders deeply and feels frustrated. So she asks Raelle to take care of herself and to eat properly. Raelle blushes and says that she is trying to lose weight. Yunifer is struck by her cuteness. Raelle holds her hand and asks her how she's doing. Yunifer tells her about her job. Raelle begins to say something when suddenly Yunifer wrenches her hand from her hold and startles Raelle. She stammers to find an excuse to change the subject, finds a candy and hands it out to Raelle very awkwardly. She asks Raelle to eat well. Raelle looks at the candy and is surprised to see her still carrying that candy around. Yunifer utters a quick goodbye as she dashes away, while Raelle is left standing behind. The story cuts to a different scene, with the sounds of coughing echoing throughout the room. The wood in the fireplace is burning bright, but Yunifer is cozied up under blankets coughing. She is down with fever, while Rosie tends to her, asking if she should burn some more firewood, even though she herself feels warm as hell. Yunifer assures her and asks her to take a break. Rosie walks away, telling her to call if she needs anything. The doors are shut and Yunifer tries to sleep. She is still in fever and hears a pecking noise. She opens her eyes only to see Raya outside the window. Raya knocks at the window loudly, and Yunifer casts a stream of flying water to open the lock of the window. Raya flies to her and rubs its beak on her face affectionately. Raya feels warm, and suddenly it spreads its wings and sits over Yunifer like a mama bird tending its eggs. As Yunifer mutters how Raya is too heavy, the bird glares at her and flops by her side. Yunifer thanks Raya warmly. Raya draws a blanket over her and drops a sealed letter by her side. Yunifer is fast asleep. Later we see frustrated bangings as Yunifer tries hard to break free out of the ice cube around her. She shivers in cold with no way out. Suddenly, she is taken aback by a ball of fire that appears out of nowhere. She moves her hand closer to it, but it is not too hot. The ball of fire suddenly bursts into flames. Yunifer is delighted as the flames grow larger, but she is taken aback by the sound of Ishid's laughter. She turns around searchingly, and suddenly the flames materialize into Ishid. He looks at her lovingly and promises to give her more. He asks her to sleep some more, and suddenly, Yunifer blinks her eyes open. Ishid is lying beside her, asking her to sleep some more. She is surprised to see him, as she thinks she was in a dream. He smiles. Yunifer is delighted. But suddenly she realizes something and looks around her. The doors are shut. She asks him how he got into her room. Ishid says he used magic because it was an emergency and transported himself through her fireplace. Yunifer is shocked at his confession of trespassing. She thinks about how uncharacteristic this is for him. Ishid gets a bit nervous. He says that he had tried calling her a few times through the fireplace. But when she didn't respond, he rushed to check in. He apologizes and redacts his excuse. Yunifer doesn't mind his trespassing, but she is only shocked. Ishid offers to leave. As he turns to leave, Yunifer becomes extremely agitated. She grabs his hand and struggles to cough up an excuse to make him stay. Ishid becomes confused. He patiently waits for her to say something. Yunifer asks him to imagine she heard a scream while walking by the house, a desperate cry for help. Unable to ignore it, she peered through the open window and saw someone sprawled across the floor. So she opened the window and rescued them. She asks him if she would have been wrong to save a person out of good intentions. Ishid looks down and says his case is slightly different from her hypothetical situation, as he would not have checked in had it been someone else in place of Yunifer. Yunifer thinks about how most people would have accepted her justification, but not Ishid. She tries a different way and says that she decides he is not a trespasser. She allows him to stay for as long as he likes. Ishid seems to agree, but his shoulders are slumped. Yunifer realizes something. She thinks for a moment and reaches for his shoulder. There's a sudden FWAA sound as Ishid tries to speak. Yunifer asks him if her mana feels cool. She is performing mana purification, which can only be performed between two intimate mages of opposing elements. Yunifer knows it sounds and feels like something a sick person should not be doing. After the ritual, she is a bit exhausted but asks him how it was. Her hands tremble and cold. Ishid notices that. He says yes, solemnly. She tells him it would be good for her too. Ishid is confused. Yunifer asks him to purify her mana. Ishid hesitantly tells her he has never done it before. Yunifer encourages him to go ahead, as it was her first time too. Ishid fears what if she dies because of him. He tells her what if he ends up hurting her. Yunifer reaches for his arm and reassures him that it would not happen since the effects of opposite elements are partially neutralized. Besides, she asks him if he had ever heard of mana purification hurting anyone. He replies negatively. She takes his hands and gently places them on her shoulders and asks him to try a little. Ishid is nervous, but he looks at her, closes his eyes, and begins the ritual. Yunifer is surprised because she thought this was a cute and fluffy ritual, but she begins to feel pain. Suddenly, the pain stops, and she feels a little confused. Ishid opens his eyes and frantically asks if she is all right. Yunifer feels warm. Her face is red. Ishid is scared to see her, but he keeps staring at her intently, trying to understand. She falls back on the bed with a loud thump as he screams her name. For a moment, in place of Yunifer, the sight of another girl floods the screen. Ishid freezes for a few long moments. Suddenly, Yunifer jolts upright and asks him if she scared him. He asks her if she is all right. She says she feels super refreshed and all warmed up. She tells him she wishes for him to do this to her every day. When he says it won't be healthy, she asks him to do it once every 3 days. She pleads with him. He says she must rest a week. She tries to further negotiate it down to once a week. He disagrees and warns her of its danger. He knows it is quite dangerous. And yet, Yunifer continues trying to negotiate with him like an excited child. Her eyes sparkle as she keeps on trying, by suggesting 10 days or even 2 weeks of gap. Ishid asks her why she forgave him. She is confused for a moment, and then says that what he did not feel bad for her. Besides, she thinks how she had done worse things to him 2 days back. She tells him to take it easy and live life to the fullest, as they have about 100 years to live. Ishid sighs. He says that if he does as he wishes, he would be no different than a bull in a china shop, harming other people. Yunifer gapes at him. She asks him if he wants to steal from or harm other people. Yunifer then asks him if he was talking about unintended harm. Ishid says yes. Yunifer again channels her inner philosopher and gives him another hypothetical situation to think about. She asks him to imagine he went to the market to buy apples, but there was only one left. But she came by the store and bought the apple even though he had been there first. She asks him what he would have done in the situation then. Ishid says he would have found another apple, much to Yunifer's frustration. He says if they both need something, he would ensure there are two pieces of it, one for each. Yunifer tells him the easier solution is to just take what he wants when he is there first, without caring about her disappointment. Ishid says he does not want to disappoint her. His innocent answer gives her a headache. She tries to think of a different scenario and asks him to imagine it were a golden apple which had no other copy in the world. He says he would have given it to her. Yunifer could not believe him. Ishid smiles and says he does not need the golden apple, especially when she seems to want it more. Yunifer is left speechless. She gives up. She comes up with a new hypothetical, where his competitor is a random kid, and they both want strawberries. He says he would have given up those strawberries no matter who it was. Yunifer agrees with his decision, but tries to make him differentiate between a choice and obligation. He nods and says he would keep that in mind. Yunifer smiles in partial disbelief. She wishes he would have been a bit more selfish. She knows it is caused by his obsessive-compulsive disorder from a defining moment in his childhood. She further tells him to remember how he would feel when he gives up the apple. She tells him it may not always be just an apple, but something far more precious that he might have to give up. Ishid cautiously asks her if he may have something if he desperately wants it. Yunifer beams in joy. She encourages him. Yunifer knows that it is not Ishid's fault that his mother, a wind mage, fell very sick after his birth. She is the same woman he had imagined for a moment when Yunifer fell down on the bed after the mana purification. He loved his mother as much as she loved him, but one day he opened his eyes to see that she had passed away. His father cursed and blamed him. Yunifer presses his hand, as if trying to say it was not his fault. She wishes she could have consoled him with words, but she does not want to take Raelle's part away. She shows him the crystal he had given her, and says that she has used it up. He asks if it had been of any assistance. She says she has used it so much that she began telling his name out as the activation code even in her sleep. He presses the crystal between both of his hands and recharges it instantly. He assures her he would recharge it as many times as she wishes. She thanks him. Suddenly, she remembers something and gets up, goes through her stuff and gifts him a crystal with the activation code same as her name. She says it will soothe nightmares away. Ishid looks at it. The blue crystal shines brightly. He says this is the first time he feels glad and happy to have been born as a fire mage. Yunifer is dazed at how sweet he is. Suddenly, there is a knock at the door. Yunifer thinks it must be Rosie, but Ishid tells her it is likely someone else. He says it is the Count, her father. Shocked and scared, Yunifer almost freezes on the spot. Yunifer is shocked at how calm Ishid looks. She hears the jiggle of the lock, with her father asking for permission to come inside. Yunifer blocks the door and asks him to wait. She paces around the room, not knowing what to do. She asks Ishid for help. He asks if it would be a problem if her father finds out about them. She says there would be a lot of explaining to do, which she would like to avoid. Then Ishid says he would make himself scarce. He snaps his fingers and he lights up the fireplace. He presses his hand on her forehead and hopes she won't be ill for much longer. He holds the crystal she had given him and thanks her again for it. With that, he disappears through the fireplace. Yunifer screams a thank you as the burning firewood remains behind. Yunifer brings her father inside and apologizes for the wait. He asks her if she has been talking to someone, but she says she has been talking to herself. Her father looks intently at the closed window. He sits down on the sofa and tells about how he has heard of her sickness. Yunifer quickly says she would be able to work tomorrow. After an awkward silence, he says that would be a relief. Suddenly, Yunifer asks him how he is home from work earlier today. She realizes that Ishid must have sneaked out of work early as well. She thinks she needs to teach Ishid to be more cunning as well, as that is not something Raelle could do. Her father says he ended work early today. Yunifer asks if he is feeling warm and if she should turn the fireplace off, but he declines the offer and prepares to leave. There is an awkward silence yet again. She realizes he is sweating, but was too stiff to say that. She feels sorry for the Count, who has no idea that the body of his daughter is being used by someone else. She addresses him as father as he walks out of the door and bids him good night sweetly. He turns back, a little taken aback, and wishes her a good night back. Yunifer thinks it would be nice to have a relationship with father, but for now she decides to get some sleep and locks the door. The story cuts to a different day, where Yunifer is shown busy with some papers at her work. Suddenly she turns at the noise of pecking and greets Raelle. She thanks the bird for its hard work. Raelle has been delivering letters between the two, who have been dating for 10 days now. Yunifer reaches to grab the letter from its claws, but the bird jerks away. She realizes what she had forgotten and gives the bird its favorite treat. Raelle, now satisfied, extends her claw, carrying the letter. Yunifer thinks about how Raelle has stopped letting her take the letters without receiving treats these days. She flips open the letter and reads Ishid's note, asking if he can pick her up. She smiles. She folds a letter in response, ties it to Raelle's claw, and watches it fly away. Suddenly there is a knock at the door. Martha calls her about the news of a new patient. Yunifer rushes to look at the patient, only to see it's none other than Raelle. Yunifer is shocked and asks about her injury. She says she has accidentally cut herself on broken glass. Yunifer wonders why she has not the wound treated herself, but then shakes her head and decides to treat her. She performs a standard checkup and decides to clean the wound first. But when she looks at the wounds intently, she realizes that Raelle seemed to have been holding on to the broken glass shards, as this was not an accidental wound. Raelle seems thoughtful, staring into the distance. Yunifer decides to not overthink and casts a healing spell. It is supposed to be painful, but she notices that Raelle has been holding up well. Suddenly, Raelle squeezes Yunifer's hands. Yunifer is startled. Raelle calls out her name and says that she has been on her mind. Yunifer is shocked at Raelle's confession. She struggles to respond. Raelle says that he said he cheated because he loves her. Yunifer is about to say something mean about Cassian, but restrains herself. Raelle continues that he won't break up with her because he loves her, and that she should ignore his casual flings. Yunifer clenches her jaw and tries to quickly finish her treatment before getting involved. Raelle admits that she is ashamed to talk about this before anyone, and that Yunifer is the first person before whom she is talking about this. This agitates Yunifer further. Raelle asks Yunifer if she wants to pretend that she did not hear her. Raelle tears up. Yunifer feels bad for her. She looks away and thinks about how the Crown Prince Cassian and the Count's daughter Raelle seem a perfect match on paper. She realizes that Raelle is confiding only in her because she's afraid the truth of her relationship may come out. Raelle asks Yunifer if she's done with the treatment. Yunifer tells her she is free to leave now. She hands Raelle another candy and says that the quickest way back is the moment one regrets. Raelle squeezes it in her palms thoughtfully and thanks her in tears. Yunifer feels sorry for her again, before realizing her own life is at stake. She is confused at why she gave Raelle the candy and a piece of advice, as she watches her from the window walking away. She thinks that Raelle looks a bit better now. Suddenly, she is startled to see Ishid making his way to the healing center. He is looking down. Yunifer marvels at the thought of them running into each other and sorting it out themselves. Both Raelle and Ishid are coincidentally walking towards each other. Yunifer waits with bated breath. Raelle looks up, and Ishid looks up too, but they pass by each other without any interaction. Yunifer is shocked. She is utterly confused. Ishid comes to a halt as he sees Yunifer at the window and beams at her. Yunifer sees that Raelle is leaving, but then she realizes that maybe it is not time for them to meet yet. Ishid is still waiting patiently in the blazing sun, so Yunifer rushes down to him. She pants and greets him. Ishid joins his hand above her head to create a shade and tells her that she need not have hurried. Ishid says she needs the shade because coming out from a building into the blazing sun can temporarily blind one. Yunifer still worries for him and suggests they find a shade for the both of them. She rummages through her belongings to find an umbrella and mentally thanks Rosie for having reminded her to carry it. Suddenly, Yunifer notices that Ishid's face is steaming hot. Ishid says it is bearable, but Yunifer gets upset. Ishid assures her that he is used to it. Yunifer disagrees vehemently. Ishid is surprised to see her hands trembling. He thinks how everybody expects him to not feel the heat because he is used to it, and nobody worries for him because he's the captain. He looks at a tense and upset Yunifer and thinks about how she's always concerned for his. His thoughts trail off, and he assures her once again that he is fine. He takes the umbrella gently from her hands and nods as she rattles off instructions for him to avoid the heat and to take breaks. To test him, she asks why he should listen to these instructions. He says it is because else she would be upset again. She pats his face gently and says her feelings are not important here. She tells him that he has to live for himself. He blinks. She thinks he must have cooled down a bit and asks if his carriage is cooler. He agrees. She asks if they can hold hands along the way. Ishid is taken aback and says yes as they both walk up to the carriage. The carriage drives on. Inside, many water crystals hang from the roof, which Yunifer notices keep the environment comfortably cool. Suddenly, she turns around to see a box in Ishid's hands. Ishid explains it is a gift to thank her for accepting his invitation. She tells him he indulges her far too much. Ishid confesses that he has an ulterior motive behind giving her this. He reminds her how she once said one good turn deserves another. He looks down shyly and, with sparkling eyes, asks if that means she will reward him if he behaves even better. Then he apologizes for being so brazen. Yunifer suddenly wraps him in a hug. Ishid is left speechless as she nuzzles his head into her chest. Realizing their physical proximity, Ishid blushes and buries his head deeper into her chest. Suddenly, the wheels of the carriage hit a few pebbles and the carriage destabilizes for a moment. Yunifer loses her balance and is about to fall back, but Ishid catches her and asks what he did to deserve that hug. He pulls her back and she thanks him. Yunifer asks about the gift. Ishid opens the box, and a golden apple emerges with blinding lights. It is a one-of-a-kind golden apple. Yunifer is dumbstruck and confused as well. She realizes Ishid took her hypothetical scenario too literally. Ishid asks if he has made a mistake. Yunifer quickly assures him that he is right. Ishid smiles and says he is glad she likes it. Ishid continues holding the apple because it is too heavy. Yunifer tells him that she would handle it. Ishid lets it go gently, but Yunifer almost drops it. Ishid quickly holds her hand before she can drop it. Yunifer realizes the apple is made of solid gold. She smiles and appreciates his gift. The story cuts to Yunifer stepping into a greenhouse that has a fountain inside. Ishid tells her that this is where Raelle lives, and it was built by the family gardener. Yunifer says it is beautiful. Ishid asks if she is fond of similar spaces. Yunifer thinks that if she nods yes, he might build something like this in her house. So she dodges the question by saying she loves all beautiful things and would like to visit often. She thinks it was a great answer. Ishid tells her about some roses that bloom only in this greenhouse. They are beautiful white roses that look like moondrops. Yunifer marvels at them. Ishid says they are all for her. Yunifer is still dazed, but Ishid realizes that maybe she would visit more if he does not give them to her. However, he is conflicted, because he cannot say no to her. He decides not to give her a seed then. Suddenly, Yunifer's reverie is broken by a screech as Raelle flies inside and sits on Ishid's arm. Yunifer is shocked to see how Ishid is casually holding the weight of the heavy bird. Yunifer pulls him closer and tries to ask him in a whisper if he feels like his arm is about to break. Ishid laughs. Raelle looks at them questioningly. Ishid says he is all right, but when Raelle grows bigger, he said once upon a time it was as small as his pinky. Yunifer gently strokes Raelle and asks it to watch over Ishid. Raelle is, however, indifferent. Raelle grabs her hand with its claw as if asking for a treat. Ishid scolds and shoos Raelle away. Yunifer defends Raelle. Raelle flutters away while dropping a note. Ishid picks it up and reads it. He asks Yunifer if she would like to dine now. She agrees. A lavish feast is laid out on the table. However, Yunifer sits with a dark, sulking expression. She and Ishid are seated opposite each other at a large dining table with servants standing quietly in the background. Yunifer looks across the table and asks Ishid if he has trouble holding his alcohol. Ishid replies that he does not, but says he just doesn't necessarily enjoy it. Yunifer questions him further and asks why there is only juice on the table then. She trails off, beginning to ask if he is afraid that she will pounce on him again like their first night. Yunifer stares at Ishid, who remains completely speechless. A servant, still coughing and clearly embarrassed, hastily asks to be excused. Yunifer tells him that it is all right. Ishid's hands tremble slightly as he reaches for his glass. He downs his drink in one large gulp. Yunifer leans forward on her elbows, narrowing her eyes as she asks if Ishid doesn't trust her. Ishid stammers. Yunifer points out that he isn't serving any alcohol. Ishid pauses, looking a bit sweat-dropped, and asks if she would like some. She tells him that she knows what he's worried about. Blushing, she tries to explain that it was just her first time drinking in a long time. She thinks to herself about how she went a bit berserk after spending so many years abstaining inside a minor's body. Yunifer offers a pinky swear, promising that she will stop before she gets drunk this time. Ishid gives in with a sigh, reluctantly agreeing that she can have just a little. Yunifer, delighted, thinks to herself about how they are finally dating like grown-ups. A dark green bottle and 2 elegant glasses appear on the table, ready to be served. Yunifer reassures him that she'll stop before she's drunk, but then adds a mischievous thought about how it wouldn't matter if she got a little tipsy. She watches the dark red liquid fill her glass and asks curiously if the wine is strong. Ishid begins to reassure her that it isn't at all, even claiming it is the weakest one in his collection. Suddenly, he comes to a halt, staring down with a look of realization and concern. Yunifer lets out a playful giggle. Yunifer gets up from her table to clink their glasses together. The story cuts to a scene of Yunifer slumped back, sleeping and slightly snoring. Ishid helps a heavily intoxicated Yunifer into the carriage. He assures her that a servant will be there soon to escort her to her room. Suddenly, Yunifer reaches her hand out and grabs him firmly. She pulls him closer and gently cups his face. With a playful slur, she calls him a pretty boy. Ishid is caught completely off guard. The two of them stare at each other in silence for a moment. Yunifer gazes deeply at him with wide, shining eyes, appearing mesmerized. She wraps her arms around his shoulders, leans in closer, and is about to kiss him when Ishid turns away. Ishid asks her if he has been good today. Yunifer blushes with wide eyes, letting out a soft, confused mumble. She then replies that he is always good. There is a moment of silence. Ishid steps forward into the carriage, telling her that she was the one who taught him, so she should allow him at least this much. He gently places his hand on her head while Yunifer continues to look up at him in a dazed and breathless state. The carriage door suddenly clicks shut behind them. As he asks her to reward him, Yunifer gently cups the side of his face with her hand, murmuring softly if she should reward him like this. Ishid reaches up to gently hold her hand against his cheek. He smiles softly and tells her that while this is all well and good, he prefers something else. He grazes her lips with his finger. He asks her to allow him to kiss her. Yunifer blushes. She agrees. She tries to say something. He gazes at her intently, and then kisses her passionately. Ishid places his hand firmly over the seat of the carriage, gripping the fabric. He leans back until their faces are mere inches apart. He gently cups her neck and jaw, tilting her face up toward his. Yunifer's eyes flutter shut in anticipation, a deep blush on her cheeks. He softly kisses her. Yunifer's eyes snap open, and she blinks in total confusion. She looks over to see Ishid sitting calmly on the opposite seat, his hands resting properly on his knees. Yunifer sits frozen, blinking rapidly in her bewilderment. Ishid smiles at her gently and asks if he may decide when to receive the reward. Yunifer looks slightly disappointed before agreeing. Ishid reassures her that it is not because he lost the desire, but because he wants them to remember the moment together. Yunifer smiles warmly, resting a hand near her face as she tells him she did sober up just now. She playfully adds that she can prove it to him the next morning. Ishid agrees, noting that fortunately tomorrow is Saturday, her day off. Yunifer questions this, asking if he didn't say he would be working tomorrow. Ishid explains that he just has a brief matter he must attend to in the morning. Yunifer smiles knowingly, thinking to herself that he means he'll have plenty of spare time afterwards. She tells Ishid that since she is indebted to him, she will visit him at work and ask if he would like his reward then. Ishid asks if she will be so kind as to do so. Yunifer nods, saying he picked her up from work today, so tomorrow is her turn. Ishid smiles softly and says that midday would be ideal. Yunifer agrees, noting that midday is when the temperature really starts to rise. Suddenly, there is a loud knock at the carriage door. Yunifer looks startled, but Ishid calmly states that it must be her maid. She reaches to open the carriage door. Yunifer steps out and turns back to the carriage to cheerfully bid Ishid goodnight, promising to see him tomorrow. Meanwhile, Rosie is shocked at the weight of her belongings. Ishid looks at her with soft, affectionate eyes. He wishes her a good night too. Yunifer gazes back at him fondly as they part ways. Rosie and Yunifer watch the carriage pull away into the night sky. Suddenly, Rosie calls out to her miss in a panic. She points out that Yunifer's face is completely red. Yunifer is confused. She touches her cheek in surprise and wonders internally if she is red because he didn't kiss her. She flushes even deeper, holding her hot cheek as Rosie frantically asks if she is coming down with a fever again. Yunifer wonders if maybe she is feeling shy about visiting him at work to reward him. She pauses, completely baffled by her own reaction, asking herself how she can be shy. She thinks about how she doesn't get shy about this kind of stuff. Looking up at the night sky, she asks herself one final question. Why is she blushing? A young Ishid looks down at his mom resting on the bed. While holding her hand, he notices how cold she is and thinks that maybe she will wake up if he warms her. Suddenly, there is darkness pierced by the sounds of a fire flaring up. Voices scream out in terror about a fire. A woman with brown hair uses water magic to extinguish the spreading flames as someone yells for everybody to evacuate. A young girl looks back in shock as she hears Ishid's cries for help. Ishid asks her to help save his mommy, but the fire is too strong. A loud slap echoes through the room, and young Ishid is thrown to the floor, clutching his red cheek as someone screams at him for what he has done. He sits on the ground sobbing, his green eyes wide and filled with tears. An adult man, his father, stands before him with clenched fists, trembling with rage. A shadowy crowd gathers behind the man, murmuring amongst themselves that the boy set the fire. The horrifying realization sets in that nothing remains of Ishid's mother. His furious father opens his mouth to yell. He calls his own son a demon spawn. Young Ishid looks up in absolute terror, his cheeks still burning from the slap. He sits alone on the floor, surrounded by an overwhelming darkness, thinking about how nobody consoled him. He realizes from their looks of fear and hatred that the same horror will be repeated if he dares to want something again. He thinks about how he caused all this pain and destruction simply because he had wanted love. Years later, an adult Ishid walks down a hallway, the sounds of laughter echoing nearby. He notes that he reminds himself of this often, even after growing up enough to control his mana. He stops and watches a group of his classmates playing happily with water magic. His expression remains utterly blank and melancholic as he looks on. A young girl with brown hair and a blue bow smiles brightly. It is Yunifer. Ishid's green eyes widen slightly as he watches her. He closes his eyes to shut away the rising feelings. He firmly reminds himself that he must not hope, he must not believe, and he must not desire. Suddenly, a voice breaks through his thoughts, expressing amazement and asking for his name. Ishid turns around, caught slightly off guard under the starry night sky. He thinks to himself that he should have kept his pledge that night. He remembers Yunifer smiling radiantly in her beautiful blue dress. He believes he should have held back instead of reaching out to her, no matter how desirable she was. He feels he should have sent her away safe and untouched, lest he harm her. A memory of his sick mother sitting in bed flashes through his mind. He knows from his own personal painful experience that love, once tasted, is addictive and long-lasting. He remembers their first passionate kiss on the bed, realizing that despite his fears, he could not let her go. Another memory surfaces of his mother hugging him tightly as a child, telling him to remember that an easily gained opportunity can fly away as swiftly as it arrives. Young Ishid's green eyes look up at her attentively. Back in the present, adult Ishid's face is etched with a deep sadness. He thinks about how Yunifer always tries to repay what he gives her, as if she is merely trying to settle a debt. He suspects that the guilt from that night is probably what makes him hold on to her so tightly. He reasons that since their meeting was swift and uncomplicated, their separation will be too. His hand clenches into a tight fist as he battles his own logic. He tightly shuts his eyes to block out the painful thoughts. Sitting alone in the dark carriage, he asks himself why he desperately wants to hold on to this opportunity for just a moment longer. The story cuts to the palace, where Yunifer hurries toward the courtyard, realizing she is late even though she left the house early. She struggles to carry a large, heavy brown bag, complaining to herself that it weighs a ton. She pauses to catch her breath, wishing she were a wind mage, so the trip would be easier. She walks down a long, lavish hallway, marveling at how huge the palace is. Suddenly, she hears a man's voice echoing from around the corner. Yunifer pauses in her tracks, realizing it sounds like somebody is arguing. She carefully peeks around the corner and is shocked to see Raelle standing there. Raelle bravely declares that she wishes to leave His Highness. Raelle looks quite determined. Yunifer hides back behind the wall in a panic, realizing who Raelle must be talking to. The red-haired man looks back in angry confusion. It is none other than Crown Prince Cassian Rovatia. Yunifer sweats profusely at the sight of him. Remembering that the psycho pretty much rules this place, She clutches her heavy bag, wondering what the odds are of running into these two in the middle of a serious conversation. Cassian glares down at Raelle, who offers to repeat herself since he didn't hear her the first time. She stands her ground and repeats her own statement, firmly telling him that she wishes to leave him. She states clearly that she does not want to be involved with him in any way, and that she wishes to end their relationship. Cassian asks if she even realizes what ending their relationship means. Raelle looks back with a resolute expression, telling him she knows exactly what it means. Their relationship is over. Cassian lets out a dark, breathless scoff, asking if she has gone mad. Raelle tells him she realized she wants to live her one life without shame, and she cannot achieve that as long as she is with him. She raises her voice slightly, declaring that staying with him makes her ashamed and miserable. Yunifer listens from around the corner, deciding she will probably get in deep trouble if she hears the rest of the conversation. She turns around quietly to sneak out unnoticed, thinking to herself that it is their business, not hers. She tiptoes away in her heels, mentally saying goodbye, and noting that her date is waiting for her. However, her heels begin making a noise against the floor, and suddenly, a voice booms down the hall, ordering her to halt. Yunifer freezes in a panic, trying to convince herself that he isn't talking to her. She reasons that it isn't like he called her name or anything, and decides to just ignore him and run. Just as she prepares to sprint away, Cassian firmly grabs her arm. He angrily orders her to halt, asking how she dare eavesdrop on them. Yunifer panics, knowing she absolutely cannot let him see her face. In a desperate split-second reaction, she violently jabs her elbow backward into his stomach. Cassian grunts in pain and drops to one knee, clutching his abdomen. Yunifer dashes away as fast as she can, thinking to herself that it serves him right for manhandling her. Cassian glares after her, yelling at her to halt and stop right there. Raelle watches the chaotic scene unfold in silence. She realizes that it is Yunifer. Cassian yells out a threat, warning the fleeing Yunifer to just wait until he gets his hands on her. Yunifer peeks from the corner of her eye and realizes that Raelle recognized her. Suddenly, Raelle takes the opportunity to walk away. Cassian whirls around and reaches out, yelling for Raelle to wait. He screams her name. A short while later, in a secluded corridor, Yunifer slumps against the wall, huffing and panting. She finally feels safe, but immediately questions her own reckless actions. She wonders why she hit him when she could have just wrenched her arm away. A small, proud smile creeps onto her face as she admits that the elbow strike sure felt good. But her smile vanishes instantly, replaced by a look of sheer dread. She calls herself stupid for risking her life over a fleeting moment of gratification. She also worries that Raelle might have seen her face, but trusts that she won't tell on her. She lets out a long sigh before a sudden realization stops her in her tracks. She thinks back to the argument she just witnessed and wonders why Raelle is splitting up with Cassian already. Yunifer remembers the original plot of the novel, where Raelle doesn't dump the crown prince until about a year later. Yunifer wonders to herself if it could be because of what she told her, as she recalls giving Raelle the candy and her advice. She remembers telling Raelle that the quickest way back is the moment you regret. She looks at the memory of Raelle tearing up and remembers that she did seem determined that day. Yunifer's face turns pale as a horrifying thought crosses her mind. She realizes that this means Cassian will try to kill her once he finds out. She flops down onto the stone floor in absolute despair. She groans that worse than just eavesdropping, she didn't just run away but actually embarrassed him by making him kneel and moan in front of Raelle. Yunifer grabs her head and screams in frustration, wishing she had just minded her own business. She asks herself why she can't just live quietly. Suddenly, she gasps and quickly opens her brown bag to check inside. She worries if the contents leaked, noting that she put so much effort into it for Ishid. She whispers Ishid's name softly as she looks into the bag. Yunifer suddenly jolts upright with a loud gasp, remembering that she came to the palace to see Ishid. She takes off running down the corridor, realizing that he must be waiting for her. Her heels click and clack against the stone floor as she hurries away. Ishid stands tall in his office, his arms crossed over his chest. He stares out the window at the clear blue sky. He remains completely motionless, lost in thought. Two knights whisper to each other nervously, asking what is up with the captain today. One replies that he has no idea, but notes that he has been behaving weirdly all morning. A memory shows one of the knights arriving at work early. only to find Ishid already there with a massive pile of finished paperwork. Another memory shows Ishid suddenly asking the exhausted knights to spar, standing over a gasping, worn-out soldier. Now, the knight observes. He is just sitting there. He is glaring intensely at the small clock on his desk. The knight thought the clock must be broken, until the clock suddenly exploded into pieces with a loud clank and bong. The two knights gulp in fear as the broken cogs fly through the air. They wonder if he is planning to take them apart next. One suggests they go to training before he notices them, and the other quickly agrees, dashing toward the door. Ishid stands silently at the window, a dark aura surrounding him. He notes to himself that it is noon. He wonders if perhaps something happened to her. His green eyes narrow as another possibility crosses his mind. He wonders if she simply did not feel like coming. Outside, the large palace gates stand open. Yunifer runs toward the gates, the heavy brown bag clutched in her hands. She calls out Ishid's name breathlessly as she spots him. Ishid looks in surprise. Yunifer drops the bag before him with a loud thump. She huffs, trying to catch her breath, and apologizes profusely between heavy pants, saying she is so sorry. She looks up at him with worried eyes, saying he must have waited for ages and apologizing again for being late. Ishid remains silent for a moment. He thinks to himself that just seconds ago, he was waiting for her with such desperation. And yet, he reaches out with a light blue handkerchief, gently dabbing the sweat from her forehead. Yunifer blinks in surprise at his tender gesture. He tells her that every agonizing second he waited for her was worth it to see her now, with the sweat of her efforts dotting her brow from rushing to him. Yunifer blushes deeply, clearly touched by his sweet words. Suddenly, she hears the sound of murmuring nearby. She turns her head to see a large group of knights staring at them in disbelief. The knights whisper among themselves, wondering who she is, and expressing shock that the captain is actually smiling. Yunifer turns toward the crowd and flashes a radiant, sparkling smile. She tucks a strand of hair behind her ear and brightly greets them. One of the knights points at himself in confusion, asking if she's talking to him. He nervously stammers. Before he can finish his sentence, Ishid appears right behind Yunifer with a terrifyingly dark glare. The knight breaks into a cold sweat, barely managing to croak out words, while Yunifer cheerfully mentions the terribly hot weather lately, saying they all must be exhausted. The poor knight is thinking to himself that he is actually more scared than anything. He nervously laughs, assuring her it's not at all, just a part of their routine. He begs her to please not mind them and to have a great time with the captain as he tries to escape. Yunifer stops him, calling out to wait for a minute. She sets her heavy brown bag down on the table. She cheerfully offers for them to help themselves to some fruit punch that she has made herself. The knight holding the box breaks into a terrified cold sweat. He thinks to himself that the captain will probably kill them then. Ishid glares murderously at the knight, furious that he would dare accept her gift. The poor knight shivers violently under Ishid's terrifying gaze. Yunifer turns his attention back to Ishid and realizes something. She announces that she made a special one just for Ishid. She presents a beautiful glass jar filled with colorful, heart-shaped candies. She adds that she was planning on giving it to him when they were alone. Ishid's stern expression instantly melts away. He looks at the jar of candies with sparkling eyes, completely mesmerized. The knight holding the big box cries tears of relief. Yunifer points her finger up and asks where the main entrance is. She explains that she shouldn't climb through the window in the presence of honorable knights. Ishid suddenly gets completely serious. He offers to command the knights to shut their eyes if she wishes. Yunifer laughs nervously, calling him funny and insisting she should use the main entrance since it is her first time there. She tells him she will see him soon, while Ishid looks glum at her departure. Ishid tells Conrad to wait just a minute. They stand in silence for a moment. Ishid calls out Conrad's name again. Conrad jolts in panic, stammering. Ishid asks him if he will be needing that box. Conrad frantically screams no as he aggressively shoves the box of treats back into Ishid's hands. Ishid carefully places the large brown box inside a cabinet. He pushes the cabinet door shut with a click. A knock echoes on the door to his office. Ishid turns to close the door as Yunifer enters. He gestures toward the red couch, asking her to please take a seat. Yunifer asks if he has finished his work for the day. Ishid smiles and replies that he actually came to attend a meeting. Yunifer's heels clack and click as she walks, but she suddenly winces. Ishid immediately kneels on the floor in front of her. He looks up at her with concern, asking if she is injured. Yunifer looks down in confusion. Ishid explains that he thinks he just saw her limping. He politely asks if he may remove her shoe. Yunifer blushes furiously, scolding herself internally to stop having naughty thoughts. She stammers out a flustered yes. Ishid gently holds her bare foot, but she lets out a pained sigh as it throbs. He looks worried and asks if it hurts. Yunifer explains that it hurts just a little on the side, assuming it must be from running in heels. She tells him that her shoes don't usually cause her any problems. She adds that today, however, she had to run exceptionally hard. She complains that she had to run from this awfully fierce dog. Ishid halts his movements, pausing in realization. He thinks to himself that there should be no animals in the palace, since the emperor detests them. He asks her aloud about a fearsome dog inside the palace. Yunifer confirms excitedly. She points to her temples like dog ears, complaining that it came at her barking and glaring with those yellow eyes. She shudders, saying it totally freaked her out. Ishid connects the dots in his head, repeating the detail about yellow eyes. He asks her about the color of its coat. Ishid remains kneeling, holding her bare foot. He gently blows on the sore spot, his breath wafting over her skin. Yunifer lets out a soft sigh in pain. He apologizes, and she tells him that it tickled a bit. Ishid thinks to himself that it's a pity, as he wanted to take a closer look. They stare at each other in silence for a few moments. His green eyes meet her blue ones. She remembers her own words from the night before in the carriage. She recalls telling him that she would visit him at work and ask if he would like his reward then. Her face turns completely red as she blushes furiously at the memory. Ishid slowly leans in closer, his green eyes focused intently on her. He places his hand firmly on the edge of the red couch, right next to her leg. He softly calls out her name and asks if he may have his reward now. Yunifer's heart thumps at the question. She feels shy, but also determined. She grabs his neck and pulls him in for a kiss. Ishid's eyes soften. Suddenly, there is a loud noise as Ishid jolts straight in some realization. He is in disbelief. He asks her if she is all right. He tells her he seems to have taken all her mana. Yunifer's eyes sparkle. She places a hand on his shoulder and tells him that she doesn't mind. She says that they can take it slow. Ishid looks at her intently. His knees fold on the sofa as he hovers over Yunifer. He kisses her aggressively, but then pauses as he notices something beside her. Yunifer tells him that it is her present for him. Ishid is shocked that she has brought him another present. His eyes twinkle as he stares at her intently. Yunifer looks back at him and notices the mark of her lipstick near his lips. She thinks that she doesn't want to embarrass him in front of his subordinates and gets up to grab a tissue and dabs it in the corner of his mouth. Ishid looks on innocently. Yunifer is dazed at how handsome he is. She covers his eyes with her hand, trying to figure out if they are what makes him so handsome. Next, she places her hands on his nose, trying to repeat the experiment. Finally, she realizes that everything about him is perfect. Ishid calls out her name with a smile. Yunifer asks him to stop being so overwhelmingly handsome. Ishid is a little confused and asks her if she is unwell. Then Yunifer says that he must be wondering about the present. She adds that it is not much, while Ishid says that he would cherish anything she gifts him. Yunifer thinks about how adorable he is. As she asks him to take a look, somebody suddenly calls for Ishid. Ishid asks her to ignore him and continue, but Yunifer says that it seems urgent. Once again, the voice calls for Ishid and knocks at his door. Yunifer pushes a reluctant Ishid to attend to the call, saying that she would show him the gift later. Ishid is reluctant to leave and promises that he would be back shortly. The scene cuts to Ishid standing in the hallway with a glaring look at the poor subordinate who had called him. The Crown Prince Cassian storms him and angrily asks Ishid if he has been training his subordinates to be knights or useless slugs. Ishid remembers Yunifer's words about a yellow-eyed creature in the palace who had chased her, as he notices Cassian's yellow eyes. He asks Cassian what the matter is. Cassian says they would talk in Ishid's room. Ishid leans against the doorframe, blocking his entrance. A puzzled Cassian asks him what he is doing. Ishid tells him to talk to him right here and requests him to keep it brief. Cassian wonders why Ishid seems to be oddly uncompromising today. He wonders if something has happened inside the palace which Ishid is hiding from him. He tries to interrogate Ishid, but the latter gives him brief and dismissive answers. Frustrated, Cassian asks him to hand over the palace entry and departure list. Ishid asks him why he needs it. Cassian tells him that since Ishid refused to answer his questions, he won't answer either. Ishid tells him it is mandatory to provide a reason for asking for that list. Cassian scoffs at him and calls him a stickler for rules. He tells Ishid that he is looking for a woman. Ishid's body stiffens and his gaze darkens as Cassian says he's looking for a brunette specifically. Ishid asks for more description. Cassian tells him that he only saw her back and that she wore a lilac dress and white shoes. Ishid realizes he's searching for Yunifer. He stomps his feet and advances towards Cassian, and says that it was him. Cassian feels both threatened and confused. Ishid raises his voice, calling him the fierce dog. Ishid glares at Cassian. Cassian is shocked at his words and pushes him back. Ishid refuses to provide him the list, saying it is not meant for petty use. Cassian is stunned. Ishid instructs his subordinate to safeguard the list and walks away. The subordinate thinks about what a hectic day it is. Cassian is left fuming. Ishid shuts the door to his room from inside. He turns around and spots Yunifer, sleeping on the sofa. She is fast asleep. Ishid looks at her and decides to lock the door from inside to prevent anyone from disrupting her slumber. He assures himself he has no ulterior motives and only wants to ensure she remains undisturbed. He gently locks the door. However, the sound of the doorknob twisting is loud enough to wake Yunifer up. She asks him if he has taken care of his business. Ishid is left in a dilemma. He thinks he should unlock the door now, but then he would be questioned about why he locked it in the first place. He decides to walk away without doing anything for now and approaches Yunifer, asking if she slept well. He seems a little concerned, but quickly calms once he sees how cheerful Yunifer seems after her nap. She asks him if he's ready to open his present now and hands it over to him. The box opens with a clack. Inside is an intricate, circular silver object, decorated with blue jewels, resting inside a small wooden music box with a golden winding key. Ishid turns the golden key, and the music box begins to play a gentle, twinkling melody with a soft click. Musical notes float through the air as Ishid looks down at the intricate design with wide, curious eyes. He says it is familiar. Yunifer tells him he would recognize the song once the lyrics start playing. She smiles. Ishid drowns in memories. A memory of a young Ishida lying in bed flashes across his mind. His mother sits beside him, gently stroking his head as a similar melody plays. She begins singing the same song as little Ishid starts drifting off to sleep. Yunifer asks him if he has ever heard of a dream catcher. She explains that it is a charm made by weaving a net onto a hoop and decorating it with feathers or beads. She adds that it was also the inspiration for this music box. She tells him it is said that hanging a dream catcher over one's bed prevents the sleeper from having nightmares. She giggles, admitting she knows this is a music box and looks nothing like a dream catcher, but suddenly, she notices him staring at the box silently and calls his name. She nervously asks him what the matter is. He says that he is so happy he has become speechless. She reaches out and places his hand gently against his chest, right over her heart. Suddenly, she realizes something. As her hand hovers over his chest, she feels a series of loud thumping sounds and thinks to herself how his heart is pounding. She looks at him softly and says that he may always have sweet dreams. Ishid repeats her words quietly to himself. The memory of his mother flashes through his mind again. The dark, fiery nightmare from his past flashes behind him, along with his father's curse. He thinks to himself that he is not sure if he deserves such dreams, but he looks deeply at Yunifer, his eyes softening as he thanks her. He holds the music box carefully and promises to cherish it for all time. Yunifer thinks to herself that she actually didn't make it specifically for him, but as a hobby. She sweat drops, thinking that this doesn't look like the best time to tell him that. Ishid is still thoughtful. She quickly changes the subject, asking him when he is going to try the fruit punch she had brought him. Ishid sets the music box down and says he would try it right now. He spears a pink, heart-shaped candy with a small fork. He hands it over to Yunifer and says that he would gladly share with her. She insists on him taking the first bite and playfully winks and assures him that it's not poisoned. Ishid leans forward, resting his hand on the red couch. He opens his mouth and takes a bite of the pink candy. Yunifer watches him chew. Ishid jolts in surprise as he eats it. He turns dark blue with embarrassment, thinking to himself why he did not just take the fork instead. He is embarrassed and mentally calls himself stupid. Meanwhile, Yunifer takes a bite of the candy herself. Ishid watches her eat with a soft look in his eyes. He thinks to himself that it is sweet. Yunifer chews happily, her cheeks puffed out slightly. She turns to him with a bright smile. She softly tells him that he has got milk on his lips. She leans in closer, reaching her hand toward his face. Suddenly, she leans forward and kisses him deeply. Ishid's green eyes widen in surprise as she kisses him. Ishid looks bewildered and asks Yunifer why she has rewarded him for nothing again. Yunifer innocently replies that she simply wants to, and asks if her actions have offended him. Ishid frantically assures her it was absolutely fine. Leaning in close, Ishid boldly asks if she had his permission to kiss her whenever he pleased, to which Yunifer readily agrees. Before Yunifer could finish stating that this was exactly how lovers were supposed to act, Ishid leans in and kisses her. Yunifer blushes. They look at each other. Yunifer traces a line on his face with her finger. Ishid thinks how cold she feels. He then calls out her name and compares her to a wobbly caramel pudding. Yunifer is startled. She asks if he is really talking about the dessert. Ishid talks about how a caramel pudding wobbles and jiggles when poked by a fork and says that is why it reminds him of her. He grows serious and says she is like a pudding made of water that feels warm on his tongue, and yet so refreshing when it slides down his throat that it makes him want to take another bite. And he goes on to add that it makes him feel anxious and desperate at the mere thought of not having her. Flustered by the sudden intensity, Yunifer tries to deflect by asking if Pudding is going to be her new embarrassing pet name. Ishid is surprised, and so is Yunifer as he seems quite taken aback. Ishid excitedly asks if he was actually allowed to pick a pet name for her. Yunifer pauses for a moment and then bursts into laughter, teasing him for answering her question with another question. Ishid panics, worrying he has accidentally insulted her, but Yunifer assures him it is just a joke and tells him not to be so serious. She laughs as Ishid looks on seriously. Then he too smiles. Changing the subject, she points out a fallen document and asks if his morning meeting had been about something urgent. Ishid thinks to himself that the meeting pertains to recent monster-inflicted casualties and damages across the Empire, but he tells her that it was an ordinary monthly meeting. His face grows dark. Yunifer asks him if something is wrong. Ishid tells him he must leave for Monsterwood. Yunifer nods nervously. She knows that every quarter the Order of the White Knights conducts a mission to Monsterwood to curb the growing population of monsters. But she thinks about how difficult it is for Ishid to be standing in the heat due to his high body temperature. Ishid says he will be leaving in 2 weeks for now, and will not be able to see her for a month. She says she is worried for him because it is summer and wished she could come along to help out. Ishid thinks that he wants to take her to the mission, but it would be dangerous. He declines her offer, saying it is an arduous mission, especially for someone unfamiliar with such tactical operations. Yunifer thinks how she would not mind going once. Ishid smiles at her and asks her if she is not hungry. Yunifer asks him if he would like to join her at a nearby restaurant. Ishid already had a place in mind, but he prioritizes Yunifer's choice. Yunifer gets up excitedly. Suddenly, Ishid jolts as he remembers the door is locked from inside. Yunifer reaches for the doorknob, but Ishid dashes and stands between her and the door. Yunifer is taken aback and confused. She thinks he must be as hungry as she is to be in such a hurry. Ishid nervously agrees. Yunifer slips her hand to hold his arm and tells him they should get going. Ishid smiles and agrees. He thinks everything will be all right if the ugly things are never discovered. The story cuts to a new day at the hospital where Yunifer works. The weather outside seems gloomy. The skies darken. Yunifer looks out of the window and realizes she has forgotten to bring her umbrella. Martha rushes in. She declares that there is an emergency patient as a startled Yunifer turns around. Yunifer asks her what the matter is. Martha points toward the clouds and asks Yunifer if they are monsoon clouds. Yunifer says yes, much to Martha's joy. The latter is very happy as it had been very hot lately. Yunifer smiles at her, thinking the summer has been unbearable for anyone who is not a water mage. She thinks even though there are plenty of water mages to give him the news of the monsoon, she would like to do so herself. She decides to write to him. The story cuts to a new scene, with Yunifer walking down a set of wooden stairs. She pauses at the bottom, a red question mark appearing above her head, as she looks confused to see a group of colleagues talking excitedly amongst themselves. She asks them if there is any news. Martha turns to her with a bright smile and says that there is good news. Yunifer looks surprised and asks what it is. Her colleagues giggle mysteriously, with one male colleague teasing that they don't want to ruin the surprise. Yunifer thinks to herself that whatever the news is, it must be good for her. She ponders the possibilities. Considering the time of the year, it must be the Academy's graduation season. She wonders to herself that perhaps she'll have a mentee. She crosses her arms, reasoning that of course they'll be assigned to another post after a month anyway. She smiles softly, thinking it will still be nice to make friends with another water mage. Suddenly, a voice breaks through her thoughts. It is Reincarnated, standing before her. She stands in a crisp white uniform, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. The other colleagues cheerfully welcome her, while Yunifer stands completely frozen. She stares at Raelle in absolute shock, her face pale, as Raelle nervously greets her. Yunifer breaks into a nervous sweat and asks in disbelief if she really wants to work in a clinic. Raelle looks uncertain and nods, but then asks Yunifer if she thinks the healing profession is not suited for her. Yunifer quickly reassures her that it is not the case, while simultaneously thinking to herself that it actually suits her perfectly. Yunifer thinks of Cassian and Raelle, and their dynamic. Yunifer thinks to herself that she did notice the story was progressing much faster than the book. Yunifer thinks of an image of Raelle in a grand uniform holding a flag, and recalls that she is supposed to head to the Order of the White Knight after she quits her post in the palace. She notes that this is so Raelle can become the vice captain of the White Knight in a few years, questioning herself about what she is doing in a clinic instead. Yunifer looks incredibly stressed, realizing that since she is her mentor, Raelle will be around her all the time. She notes that the real problem, however, is something else. She looks at Raelle and asks her why she is here, as even though it's a great post, it's not prestigious. Raelle looks at her and answers honestly that she wants to try this job. She parameter up at Yunifer with hopeful, pleading eyes and asks her if she can't. In her mind, a chibi Yunifer clutches her heavily beating heart, screaming how cute she is, but outwardly she maintains a cold expression and tells her that it is her choice, so she has to decide for herself. Raelle looks at her with wide eyes. She nervously fidgets with her hands and softly agrees. Yunifer looks away, her arms crossed. She glances back at Raelle and gently tells her to think about it. While she's there, Yunifer extends her hand outward and welcomes Raelle to the team. She thinks to herself that there's no way to stop a waterfall. Raelle looks surprised at the offered handshake. They shake hands as Yunifer decides that perhaps it's better to just accept the flow. Raelle thanks her. Yunifer smiles softly, comforting herself with the thought that it's just a month. She asks herself one final fateful question: what could possibly go wrong? The story cuts to a scene of a fork poking at a piece of meat on a plate with a soft poking sound. A knife slices through the meat with a sharp sound. Yunifer and Raelle sit across from each other at a dining table, eating in total awkward silence. Yunifer rubs her forehead and lets out a stressed sigh as she remembers Martha happily asking them to have lunch together when she found out they were alumni. Yunifer looks to the side with a tired expression and a small sweat drop on her cheek. Raelle continuously pokes at her food with her fork, making quiet poking sounds. Yunifer watches her and thinks to herself that she'll take forever at that speed, trying to break the ice. Yunifer asks her how was work. Raelle looks up nervously and answers that it was really difficult to make a diagnosis just by looking at the symptoms. She begins to slice her meat, explaining that figuring out which treatment to apply was more difficult than actually treating the patient. Yunifer reassures her that that's pretty normal, as all healers worry about making the wrong diagnosis. Raelle looks at her with a soft expression and says that everything else about the job is great, and everybody at the clinic is so friendly. Yunifer jabs a piece of meat with her fork as Raelle adds that Yunifer is a good teacher. Yunifer offers gently that if there's anything she's not sure about, she can just ask. Raelle looks at her in surprise, her fork hovering over her food. She slowly chews her food. Yunifer smiles, resting her arm on the table as she clarifies that, as long as it's work-related, it's fine. Raelle gazes at her with a touched, admiring expression and thanks her. Suddenly, a dark, menacing voice calls out Raelle's name. Yunifer looks up in absolute shock, her eyes wide. Raelle gasps, her face paling as she instantly recognizes the voice. Crown Prince Cassian suddenly leans over, screaming at Raelle how she quit her previous job without his permission while slamming his hands furiously onto their table as Yunifer stares at him in terror and shock. He asks Raelle how she could quit her job for this lowly post. Raelle asks him if he sent someone to spy on her. Cassian is taken aback. Raelle begins to address him angrily as Yunifer fumbles with her handkerchief, agitated. She tells him that she loves him. Cassian says it does not make any sense. Raelle grins and says that it is strange for him to not believe her excuse, considering it used to be his favorite excuse to cheat on her once upon a time. Cassian's eyes widen as he grows speechless. Raelle gets up from her seat and tells Yunifer they should go. Yunifer hides her hair behind her coat and turns to leave, just as Cassian notices a few strands of her hair. He tells her to wait and asks her if she is the brunette at the palace who had jabbed him. He advances his hand to take away the cover from her hair, but Raelle stops him. She faces him firmly and asks him how dare he. She wonders if she should introduce Yunifer as her friend or colleague and pauses for a moment. She screams at him and asks if he must embarrass her more. Cassian is taken aback. Yunifer grows more nervous. Yunifer thinks to herself that she doesn't care anymore and just wants to run away as Raelle's grip on her hand tightens. Cassian grows sad and calls out Raelle's name. Raelle turns around, takes Yunifer's hand and walks away with her. Yunifer takes a peek behind and sees a defeated Cassian standing. She thinks it serves him right. Cassian's face grows dark in sadness as he murmurs to himself that he just wanted to protect her. The story cuts to a new scene as Yunifer thinks how work flew by after that incident, and now she's finally glad to go home, only to see it heavily raining outside. She stands at the gate and notices Raelle too, standing there with an umbrella. Suddenly, Raelle calls out her name and asks her how her elbow is. She offers to heal it, but Yunifer tells her not to waste her mana on such a trivial wound. The rain keeps falling. Raelle apologizes again. Yunifer assures her it is fine. Raelle tells her that she would protect her and ensure no harm ever comes to her. Yunifer looks at her thoughtfully and assures her that it is not her fault. She tells her not to apologize again, but tells her they would not eat out by themselves anymore, while thinking that she would be exposed to more danger if Raelle were by her side. The rain keeps falling. Raelle asks what if she packs lunch so the two of them can eat together. Yunifer grows frustrated as Raelle does not pick up the hint. She tells her not to take any trouble for her. A dejected Raelle nods. Suddenly, she points out that Yunifer's carriage is there. The carriage is waiting at a distance, in silence, unmoving, as Yunifer realizes the coachman isn't coming to escort her with an umbrella because he won't expect a water mage to forget carrying one. She decides to make a run for it. Suddenly, an umbrella opens up above her head. As Raelle asks her to share an umbrella with her, Yunifer smiles nervously, but Raelle insists. Suddenly, someone calls out her name. Yunifer turns around to see Ishid waiting with an umbrella. He glances at Raelle holding out an umbrella too, and recalls she was the silver-haired girl who used to pester him back in academy days. He moves Raelle's umbrella with his and covers Yunifer with it. Yunifer notices that he is getting wet, but he assures her he finds it refreshing. He takes another glance at an innocent Raelle and recalls Yunifer's words of trying to set him up with her colleague, a powerful water mage, as realization dawns upon him. The story cuts to a recent flashback of Ishid watching Raelle and Yunifer at a distance at the gate of the clinic. Yunifer appears to smile, while Ishid stands darkly, thinking how easily that woman has seemed to earn Yunifer's smile, while he had to wait for years for his chance. As Raelle extends her umbrella for Yunifer, Ishid's grip tightens on his own, and he goes swiftly to cover her with his own umbrella, leaving her surprised. When Yunifer points out that Ishid is getting wet, he smiles and says he finds the rain rather refreshing. As he glances at Raelle, he recalls Yunifer's matchmaking attempt, and also how even back at the academy, she constantly circled around Yunifer. He thinks that if he's not careful, she might steal Yunifer away from him. Yunifer brings him back to the present and says that his clothes are getting wet. But then she notices that his shirt clinging to his body reveals his figure, and it looks really good. She blushes and then quickly snaps out of it. Ishid asks if he has been on time, and a flustered Yunifer agrees. She decides to turn towards Raelle to see what she's doing, but Ishida suddenly asks for a reward, taking Yunifer by surprise. Yunifer lightly scolds him for drenching himself and walks with him towards the carriage. Ishid walks with her, drenched and thoughtful. Raelle watches them at a distance and turns to leave. Yunifer paces alongside Ishid and gets a hold of the umbrella. She takes it from his hold and asks him to stop getting wet by tilting it only towards her. Ishid looks at her softly and agrees. He tells her that her colleague has left already. A shocked Yunifer turns around and sees the gate is empty. She feels guilty for having ignored her as her mind got occupied with Ishid. She looks back at a smiling Ishid and realizes this was his second encounter with Raelle, and yet nothing happened. She tells Ishid that they should go home and thinks to herself that perhaps the third time would be the charm, as the rain keeps pouring. The story cuts to a scene focusing on Raelle, who turns to look around at Yunifer and Ishid at a distance. She thinks about how there are some people one is inexplicably drawn to, as if by destiny. She recalls how back when she was young, wearing her academy uniform and carrying a suitcase, she arrived at her new dorm room. Inside, a young girl sat quietly on her bed. Raelle thought that must be her roommate. It was Yunifer. Raelle approached her nervously and greeted her, but she replied flatly. Raelle's internal monologue continues that perhaps she was drawn to her because she somehow felt that Yunifer was mature for her age, or because they both happened to be water mages as well as daughters of counts. Her thoughts trail off as she gets lost in the memories of their school days once again. One day in a classroom, Raelle looked over at her desk neighbor and realized that she was in the same group with Yunifer. She turned to Yunifer to ask something. Yunifer casually shaped a floating blob of water into an intricate shape. Raelle was surprised and asked if it was a dessert. Yunifer looked slightly shy, pausing for a moment. She said yes and explained that since most desserts are elaborately decorated, They could win more points if they decorated it like a dessert. Raelle looked at her in awe, noting she was so good at mana control as she herself struggled with it. Yunifer gently explained that it was because Raelle had been born with much more mana than the average water mage. She assured her that it is pretty easy once one gets the hang of it. She also smiled confidently and declared that there is no big deal if she found it difficult, as they're just first years. Raelle's eyes widened in sheer admiration at Yunifer's bold words. Suddenly, Yunifer realized something and suggested that they get back to the project. Raelle thought to herself that Yunifer was kinder than she let on. Another memory shows Yunifer sitting completely alone at her desk in an empty sunlit classroom. Raelle assumed that she preferred silence and privacy to the noise and bustle of people's company since she seemed to rarely mingle with others. She was sprinting down a hallway in a panic. She was late, as she had gotten the group meeting dates mixed up. Suddenly, she stopped, as she heard the sound of cheerful giggling echoing nearby. She looked over to see Yunifer playfully splashing water and having a wonderful time with a group of other classmates. Yunifer laughed brightly and freely, a massive genuine smile on her face. Raelle watched her from afar in stunned silence. She realized she had been mistaken. Raelle looks frozen as she realizes her mistake. As soon as the other classmates saw Raelle, Yunifer got nervous and quiet. Raelle realized that she was avoiding her. She decided to talk to her later, as there must have been a misunderstanding. When Raelle went back to her room that day, she saw a new girl. The girl explained she was her new roommate. She asks her if Raelle had quarreled with her old roommate, as the latter had asked for a room change. Later on, Raelle and Yunifer ran into each other. Raelle asked her if she had asked for a room change. Yunifer nervously agreed. Raelle felt small and asked why. Yunifer told her it was a minor personal inconvenience. Raelle asked her if it was because of her. Yunifer assured her it wasn't, and that she just wanted to be in a room with a friend. Raelle looked down. Yunifer told her not to take it personally. Raelle slowly spoke and said that Yunifer was not friends with her new roommate, Michelle, either. Yunifer could not hear her and asked her what she was saying. An embarrassed Raelle said it was nothing. She covered her face and dashed away. She came to a halt at a distance and looked back at Yunifer one last time. The story cuts to the scene at the present day. As Raelle looks at Yunifer with longing and sadness, she noticed that she was the only one to turn around and look back, and not Yunifer. A new scene unfolds as Yunifer looks out of her carriage window, patting the water off her sleeves. Suddenly, she turns to the sound of Ishid's laughter. She asks him what is so funny. Ishid tells her he is just very happy to see her. Yunifer finds it cute. She notices water dripping from Ishid's hair, reaches out towards him, and tries to brush it off with her hands as he looks at her. She calls him beautiful. Ishid is startled. He looks at the closed window of the carriage with the corner of his eyes to check his reflection. Suddenly, he recalls his father's words of calling him a demon spawn. He falls silent. Then he calls out Yunifer's name and asks her if she really finds him beautiful. Yunifer looks at him in surprise, wondering to herself if he didn't know. Ishid looks glum and softly asks if it is something he should have known. Yunifer's eyes soften as she looks at him. She thinks to herself that his beauty would be plainly obvious to anyone. A flashback shows a young, lonely Ishid standing before a row of gravestones in a dark, misty cemetery. Yunifer mentally notes that he didn't know because nobody was there to tell him. She wonders how many times he was forced to choke back tears until he failed to notice such an obvious fact. Yunifer looks down with a deeply saddened expression. She softly calls out his name. She gazes at him with a tender, serious look and tells him that he is very beautiful. Ishid's green eyes widen in stunned silence. He sees that Yunifer looks sad and realizes that she feels sorry for him. He thinks about how many have been saddened by him in the past, but nobody has been saddened for him until now. He looks at her, a soft expression on his face. He thinks to himself that knowing she feels sad for him makes him feel both happy and sad, even though it might be selfish. He considers that if he causes her to feel anything, he would prefer it to be pure joy. He looks down for a moment and asks her directly if his beauty makes her feel happy. Yunifer blinks in slight surprise. With sparkling eyes, Ishida leans forward eagerly and asks which part of his body is beautiful. He continues by asking her to tell him how he can present it to make her happier. Yunifer pauses to think, resting her hand near her chin. She tells him that for one, his hair is pretty. He reaches up and touches his dark hair as Yunifer starts to add something else. She smiles warmly and notes that his eyes are too. Suddenly, Ishid raises his hand toward his own eye, and his fingers burst into bright, dangerous flames. Yunifer gasps in pure shock. She violently lunges forward, grabbing his burning hand to pull it away from his face. She screams in absolute panic, demanding to know what he is doing. Ishid calmly tells her that he was about to cut off his hair and give it to her. Yunifer screams in a panic, demanding to know why. Ishid looks away with a cheeky expression and replies that he did it so he could give it to her, causing Yunifer to facepalm in exhaustion. Yunifer lets out an exhausted sigh and asks if he is just going to give her anything she wants. Ishid casually agrees, asking what else she would like. Yunifer thinks to herself in horror that she is seriously afraid that if she said she liked his heart, he might actually take it out for her. Yunifer looks at him, wondering to herself what she is going to do with him. She is frustrated with him. She asks him what he likes about her body the most. Ishid asks if it has to be a part of his body. Yunifer confirms that it does. Yunifer nervously asks if she must decide right now. Ishid replies that she must. Ishid looks shocked and agitated. He covers his mouth in deep thought, sweating. Yunifer leans down next to him and asks if he likes her eyes. Ishid quickly confirms that he does. She then suggests that they say he likes her eyes best. Ishid glances to the side thoughtfully. Yunifer points at herself in surprise before letting out a soft realization. She looks at her hand and asks if he likes her hand. Ishid seems startled. She gently suggests her lips. And then feet. Yunifer looks incredibly stressed, thinking to herself in frustration that this could go on forever. She firmly suggests that they suppose he chose her eyes, then. She asks him if he thinks her eyes are beautiful. Ishid smiles and confirms that they are very beautiful. Yunifer tells him to imagine that her eyes are plucked out and he is holding them in his hands. Ishid looks shocked and horrified. A close-up shows Ishid's horrified green eyes. Yunifer looks at him seriously and asks how he would feel then. Ishid looks completely devastated and dark, answering that he would want to kill himself. Yunifer looks softly at him and explains that that is exactly how she felt when he tried to cut off his hair for her. Ishid looks down in shame and asks if he has upset her. Yunifer tells him that he made her sad. As they hold hands, Yunifer asks him to remember what she told him before, reminding him that seeing him sad makes her sad as well. Yunifer explains that not cherishing himself saddens those who cherish him. Ishid looks down and quietly asks if she cherishes him. Yunifer immediately assures him that of course she does. Yunifer looks at him tenderly and tells him that his beauty does not exist for other people's pleasure, but belongs solely to him. Ishid perks up slightly with a blush and asks if it will be all right if he uses it for himself, leaving Yunifer to wonder to herself what has come over him before loudly confirming that, of course it is. Ishid admits that he doesn't quite understand how to utilize it and asks her what she thinks he should do. Ishid looks intently at Yunifer as they sit together. Yunifer softly looks back at him. She gently touches her cheek with her hand, telling him that she thinks his eyes bend like crescent moons when he smiles broadly. He continues, looking softly at her while she adds that it is her favorite. He clasps her hands gently in his. Yunifer reacts with a small exclamation of surprise. Ishid looks at her with a charming, sparkling smile as he holds her hands, asking if he should do it like this. Yunifer stares blankly at him, completely dazed by his charm. Yunifer clutches her chest in a panic, thinking to herself that her heart almost burst just then. Yunifer holds a black umbrella and notices something, letting out a questioning sound. Suddenly, Yunifer notices the cracked handle of the umbrella in confusion, wondering why it is cracked. The umbrella rests beside Ishid. Yunifer exclaims at its condition. She remarks that it is odd, as she thought the material was quite sturdy. She adds that it almost looks like the grip was crushed with brute force. Ishid looks away shiftily, sweat dropping as Yunifer says that she is sure nobody else touched it except them. Ishid continues to sweat nervously, wondering to himself how he should reply if she asks why he broke it. Yunifer suddenly lets out an exclamation of realization. Ishid glances at her nervously. Yunifer turns to Ishid, who is sweating and trembling in panic, and tells him she hopes this wasn't his favorite umbrella. Ishid looks incredibly surprised by her statement. He covers his face with his hand in relief while Yunifer holds the broken umbrella, confused. Ishid explains that his possessions have a tendency to crack and break. He continues, mentioning that he just broke his clock too. A chibi version of the broken clock angrily yells at him as Ishid looks down sheepishly next to Yunifer. Ishid looks down with a sad aura, innocently stating that he only has himself to blame. The chibi clock screams in frustration at his act as Yunifer quickly reassures him that it is not his fault. Yunifer tells him that that is just the way things are. She states that nothing is immune to the wear and tear of time. Ishid looks at her softly and starts to add a counterpoint. Yunifer looks back at him attentively. Ishid gazes at her with a serious expression. Yunifer thinks to herself that she can guess what is on his mind. Yunifer leans forward and wraps her arms around him in a hug, telling him not to worry. As she hugs him, she reassures him that she is not an object, so she won't break. Ishid holds her hand and looks at her intensely, asking if she will always stay by his side. Yunifer looks at him with a soft, serious expression, reflecting on the word, always. Yunifer embraces him fully, her head resting on his shoulder, and promises that of course she will. Ishid looks down with a softened, deeply moved expression. Ishid hugs her back tightly, closing his eyes as he squeezes her. He nuzzles into her neck, giving her a soft kiss and nibbling gently, causing Yunifer to let out a soft gasp. He is pressing his face into her neck affectionately, opening his mouth to bite softly. Yunifer holds him as he continues to embrace her, a soft blush on her face. He leans in and softly sucks on her neck, causing Yunifer to let out a small whimper. Suddenly, Ishid opens his eyes. Yunifer looks back with flushed cheeks as her name is called. Ishid holds her shoulders and softly asks for permission to untie the knot of her dress. Ishid and Yunifer both look at each other as he plays with the knot of her dress. She looks down and unties it herself. She slips the dress off her shoulders, revealing her bare back. The yellow fabric drops down her arm. Yunifer looks at Ishid softly and asks if they should kiss. Ishid quickly embraces her, leaning in and kissing hungrily. He slides his hands over her chest, grabbing her breasts. He kisses her deeply and their tongues collide in a frenzied battle. Ishid leans back to catch his breath as his hands squeeze her bust harder. Yunifer feels that his mana is very hot. Suddenly, Ishid leans forward and buries his head into her neck. He covers her neck with kisses while she moans his name out loud. Suddenly, the carriage stops in the pouring rain. They notice that they have reached Yunifer's home. Ishid and Yunifer sit inside the carriage. Ishid, noting that the carriage has stopped, Ishid gently pulls Yunifer's yellow dress back over her shoulders to cover her. A close-up shows Yunifer's blue eye as she watches him. Ishid looks down silently as Yunifer looks back at him. They sit together in silence. Yunifer asks if he would like to come to her room. Ishid freezes. He looks surprised and asks if she means her room. He excitedly says yes, gladly. Yunifer asks if they should go then. Ishid agrees. The carriage door opens in the rain. Ishid holds Yunifer's hand as they prepare to exit, while she tells him she's hoping he isn't nervous since this won't be their first night together. Ishid nervously admits that he is a little... Ishid holds an umbrella over them, and while she asks him why he doesn't trust her, she reassures him that he doesn't need to worry because she is perfectly sober today. Ishid stops walking. He looks back at her seriously and clarifies that it is himself whom he cannot trust. Yunifer looks back at him with a soft blush, stunned. She playfully tells him not to worry about her coming onto him drunkenly again as they walk. She suggests that they can take things slowly this time and be more lovey-dovey. Ishid suddenly stops walking, surprising Yunifer. She peeks out from behind him, asking why he stopped. Her father is standing under a black umbrella in the rain outside their house. Yunifer freezes in shock as her father looks on. She fears if he heard what she was just telling Ishid. Ishid greets him as Count Magnolia. Yunifer glares at him. Ishid quickly corrects himself and addresses her father as Lord Magnolia. Suddenly, a lightning erupts the sky. As they all stand awkwardly, the Count acknowledges the weather. Yunifer nervously agrees. Her father looks on, and Ishid plays along as well. Yunifer holds her head in frustration, and suddenly looks at the other umbrella in the Count's hand. She realizes that he came to escort her since she had left her umbrella home. Ishid proceeds to take his leave. Yunifer holds his hand with pleading eyes. Ishid looks at her, while the Count looks at the both of them, thinks for a moment, and invites Ishid to wait at their home until the rain stops. Yunifer looks startled and hurries to stop him. Ishid looks down, leans in, and whispers to Yunifer that he accepts her invitation and would see her at night. Yunifer asks him how. Ishid asks her to light a fire in her room and pats her on the back. Yunifer loses her balance. Her father notices that and rushes to cover her with his umbrella as she bumps into his chest. Ishid thanks the Count but declines his invitation and takes his leave. The Count stares at him, icily. Father and daughter watch as the Duke's carriage drives away. The story begins with a close-up of feet clad in dark boots walking briskly over wet green brick pavement. Rain falls steadily around them, creating small splashes with a tapping sound. Yunifer and her father stand together outside a grand iron gate under a single black umbrella. Her father, looking stoic and dressed in an elegant brown coat, remarks that it seems his hospitality was rather misguided. Yunifer looks up at him with bright blue eyes, maintaining a calm expression under the umbrella. She gently reassures him that he did the proper thing. She smiles warmly at him, holding her hands behind her back. She thanks him for coming and playfully asks if he was worried about her getting wet. She is left slightly questioning as she looks at her father, who has come to a halt, and notices a shift in his demeanor. She clings to his arm and tries to finish his thoughts, but he remains quiet, Yunifer leans in slightly, looking up at him with concern. She asks if something is the matter, or if she said something wrong. Her father quickly glances away. Looking slightly flustered, he insists that it is absolutely nothing. Her father tries to hand her umbrella. Yunifer walks closely alongside him, happily wrapping her hand around his arm. She cheerfully reminds him that it is only a short walk to the house, addressing him affectionately as her father. A close-up focuses on his arm where Yunifer is holding him tightly. She has no idea how awkward and stressed he feels as he grips the umbrella handle with intense rigidity. Her father turns his head completely away, sweating nervously and murmuring how awkward it is. She pretends not to hear him, asking him to pardon her because the rain is too loud. But he only replies with a stubborn silence. Yunifer bursts into a fit of giggles, covering her mouth with her hand. As she tries to control her hearty laughter, her father stands beside her, staring at her, a little surprised. The scene changes to focus on a young, silver-haired servant who stands outside in the pouring rain under a green umbrella, looking worried with sweat drops forming on his face. The servant calls out to him, letting him know that a warm bath has been prepared. Ishid stomps ahead, as the servant is left wondering why the Duke is in such a hurry. Ishid abruptly stops in his tracks. He stares forward into space, completely preoccupied by his own thoughts as he wonders what he should wear. The servant blinks in confusion, asking for clarification. Ishid asks him to prepare something light. Suddenly, Ishid is shown from behind as he unbuttons and pulls off his damp clothing. Then, he promptly shuts the door. The scene cuts to Ishid's bath, where he thinks about how there's still no fire in Yunifer's room. He thinks she still must be bathing. Ishid is mentally stating that he would completely give up his status and wouldn't mind becoming her servant. He wonders about combing her hair, dabbing her arms and legs with smooth cloth, brushing down her thighs. Suddenly, he breaks out of his reverie and asks himself what he is even thinking. His intense green eyes flash with conflict as he mentally notes that it is not a servant's place to covet his mistress. He thinks he would kill anyone who touches her lustfully. But he also notes he is different himself, as he is her lover. A soft, dreamlike memory flashes through his mind, where he carries Yunifer into a bath. She looks at him tenderly. Suddenly, he buries his face into her shoulder and slips the robe off her. As he reaches for the warmth between her thighs, suddenly he breaks out of his daydreams, breathless. Ishid calms himself down by closing his eyes and taking a moment to breathe, still trembling with raw desire as sweat pours down his face. Ishid thinks to himself that he is no better than a dog. The water in the bath begins to get warm, while an unaware Ishid tilts his head down and closes his eyes in resignation. Suddenly, there's a flare of fire erupting as Ishid takes Yunifer's name. He opens his eyes and quickly gets up from the bath. His bare feet step onto the cold floor, water dripping heavily from the skin with a soft splashing sound. The servant is taken aback as Ishid stands before him, completely undressed after his bath, with only a towel hanging around his waist. The silver-haired servant stands before him, politely informing him that he has prepared something light exactly as requested. The camera angles to show a white shirt. Ishid notes it is nightwear. The servant looks at him with wide, nervous eyes, asking if his grace would prefer something else instead. Ishid's face is cast in heavy shadow as he stares downward. He darkly notes that he supposes he has no other choice. Ishid puts it on and looks down on himself, and repeats to himself that he indeed had requested something light. Ishid slowly begins to smirk as he murmurs that he has no choice. The servant mentally notes that Ishid sounds pleased. Ishid assures him that it is all right and says he is off to somewhere. The servant wonders where he may be going dressed like that. Ishid, now dressed in a crisp white shirt, furiously chugs a potion down his throat with loud gulping sounds. The servant stands in the background, sweating profusely from sheer anxiety. Suddenly, a huge flare of fire erupts. The servant manages to open his eyes and is left surprised to see that Ishid has disappeared. Suddenly, he notices something. It is the empty bottle of potion on the table that Ishid has left behind. He notes that it is birth control and remembers Ishid's insistence on wearing loose clothing. The silver-haired servant stands frozen and utterly dumbfounded, sweat running down his face. He blushes furiously in realization as he puts the scandalous pieces together. The story begins inside a cozy room where a roaring fire crackles loudly within a large stone fireplace. Yunifer stands nearby, dressed in an elegant white, lace-trimmed nightgown, peering curiously into the room. Suddenly, there's a large flare of fire erupting into the fireplace. She gasps out in complete shock as the flames almost engulf her. But those flames manifest into Ishid, hugging her. He buries his face into her hair in a fierce embrace, whispering her name. Yunifer freezes in his arms, her heart pounding heavily against her ribs. She thinks about how she almost thought she was going to be killed by the sudden burst of flames. Ishid breathes in deeply, murmuring softly that she smells incredibly nice. Yunifer gently strokes the back of his head. Suddenly, she comes to a halt. He pulls back just enough to look at her, calling out her name in a quiet whisper. Yunifer looks down nervously, her cheeks flushing as she notes how lightly he is dressed. She looks at his thin white shirt, realizing he is wearing thin nightwear because of how late the hour has grown. Ishid asks if he has dressed up oddly. He explains that his butler had mistakenly set up nightwear for him as he had requested something light. Yunifer tenderly brushes his chest with her fingers. Her heart beats fast as she mutters that it is so sexy. Those soft words are all the encouragement Ishid needs. Before she can say anything else, he reaches out and firmly grabs her by her hips. They lock eyes, Ishid's intense green gaze meeting her wide, startled blue eyes. The view tilts upward toward the grand glowing chandelier above them as they shift positions. They tumble together onto the plush red couch, Ishid landing gracefully directly over her. He leans down immediately, his lips pressing hungrily against her neck as he parts her collar. His hand slides smoothly under the lace trim of her nightgown, his fingers brushing against her breasts as he pulls the nightgown down. Ishid lets out a heavy, ragged breath, his eyes trembling with raw desire as a deep flush covers his face. Yunifer looks up at him, trying to maintain her composure, and softly asks what the rush is. Ishid leans in closer to her ear as she breathlessly whispers for him to come closer. He presses his lips against hers, completely overwhelmed by her presence. He secures her arms above her head, pinning her gently but firmly against the cushions. They look at each other, her blue eyes meeting his green ones, as he asks hoarsely if he may undress her. He exhales another hot breath, waiting for her response, as his hands hover over her breasts, and suddenly twists one of her nipples between his fingers. Yunifer lets out a soft moan in delicious pain, and then looks at him. She wraps her legs around his waist, gently telling him that he doesn't need to ask for her permission every single time. She reaches up, wrapping her arms securely around his neck to pull him down to her, and slides his shirt off. Ishid responds instantly, shifting his weight to press his body firmly against hers. He gasps silently at the sudden warmth and closeness of his frame. She looks up at him with complete surrender, whispering for him to undress her, touch her, and do absolutely whatever he likes. Ishid's eyes widen slightly in surprise, his face cast in shadow. He asks if she can really say something like that. He leans down even closer, his tone growing darker and more intense as he asks if she knows what he might actually do to her. Yunifer rests her head back against his chest, as a confident, playful smile returns to her lips. She meets his gaze directly, firmly assuring him that she means it and that he can do whatever he wants with her. She reaches down, slowly sliding the lace strap of her nightgown down past her shoulder. He goes quiet for a moment, simply staring down at her exposed skin. Yunifer notices his sudden stillness and wonders to herself if his reaction is a little too lukewarm, instantly plotting her next move to see how he will react. She reaches down, teasingly pulling the hem of her nightgown up along her thigh. Ishid gasps sharply, his green eyes burning with sudden, unchecked heat as he bites her thigh in raw desire, his voice dropping into a dark, commanding register as he tells her she must show him everything. He adds intensely that she must show him every single second of her arousal. Yunifer's playful confidence instantly vanishes, her face turning bright crimson as she panics internally over his sudden dominance. Ishid murmurs low against her skin, reminding her that she already gave him her full approval, as he reaches for the hem of her dress. Completely overwhelmed, Yunifer covers her burning face with both of her hands, frantically begging him to wait a second. She peeks through her fingers in utter embarrassment, asking if he truly wants to see absolutely everything. Ishid tilts his head slightly, a smooth, unbothered expression on his face as he asks her why not. Yunifer keeps her face shielded, her mind racing from a sheer boldness. Ishid gently but firmly reminds her of her own words that he could see everything. He lowers his head slightly, a soft, almost dejected expression crossing his features. He aligns his fingers, wanting to insert them within her, as he says she had allowed him to do whatever he likes. Yunifer instantly feels a pang of guilt, reluctantly admitting to herself that she did indeed say that, as she looks up at his pouting face. Suddenly, Yunifer breaks into laughter, remembering how clumsy and awkward he had been on their very first night together. She wonders frantically to herself how he could have possibly gotten so incredibly skilled in such a short amount of time, especially since she was the one who taught him. Ishid lets out another ragged breath, his lips hovering just a fraction of an inch from hers. Yunifer turns her head away slightly, burying her face into her arm as she trembles from the overwhelming intensity of his touch. Ishid leans down, looking at her with deep tenderness, and softly asks if she is hating this. He relaxes when she assures him that is not the case. He presses his crotch between her warm thighs, and asks if she is liking it. Yunifer stares at his manhood. As her eyes snap wide open in breathless shock, she completely freezes in utter disbelief, thinking how impossible it seems that such a huge thing has been inside her. Ishid looks down at her with a soft, adoring expression, quietly calling out her name. He hovers directly over her, his muscles tense and defined as he supports his weight above her body. He gazes into her eyes with pure, unyielding passion, asking her softly if he may move inside her exactly as he likes. Yunifer gasps aloud, her eyes widening in surprise. She tells him to hurry, and Ishid quietly complies. As he thrusts inside her, she arches her back off the red couch, her hands desperately gripping Ishid's broad, bare shoulders. She tells him that it feels too hot. The cushions shift violently beneath them with a heavy, rhythmic thud as Ishid drives deeper inside her. Water mana emerges from Yunifer, while fiery mana emerges from Ishid, so Ishid notices how cold she feels. As his hands clench at the bed sheets, he pants heavily, sweat dripping down his face as he maintains his steady rhythm. Yunifer cries out breathlessly, her head tossing back against the plush red upholstery as the intense physical sensation overwhelms her. Ishid calls out her name, while Yunifer's face flushes red and her eyes widen. Ishid leans lower, his lips pressing hungrily against her collarbone as he sucks firmly on her lips, eliciting a muffled, low groan from the back of her throat. As he gives a final thrust inside her, they come together, and right at that moment, Yunifer bites Ishid's lips hungrily. The latter is left with a bloodied lip, as his eyes widen in surprise. He pauses for a split second, the heavy silence between them filled only by their ragged breathing. Yunifer grows anxious and asks him if he is okay. Ishid wipes the blood off from his mouth. He leans his entire weight down onto her, burying his face into the crook of her neck as he holds her tightly against his chest. He plants a soft, lingering kiss on her bare shoulder while telling her that it is all right. Yunifer rubs her legs against his skin and pauses as she notices something. Yunifer breathlessly calls out his name and says how incredibly strange and overwhelming this whole experience feels. Ishid laughs softly and asks her if she would reward him more if he kept pleasuring her more. He keeps rubbing himself between her thighs, as Yunifer can only let out soft whimpers and squeeze her legs around his waist, harder. She lets out a scream as they come together, with only the fireplace in the room standing witness to their passionate lovemaking. The view cuts away briefly to the cool, tranquil water of the bathhouse, contrasting sharply with the fiery heat currently consuming the previous room. Yunifer is shivering in mild disgust. As Ishid slowly makes her drink a bitter healing potion from a glass, Yunifer pouts angrily and gets up to wash herself. But Ishid holds her hand and pleads with her to do it one more time. Yunifer gets startled and angrily asks if he is serious, while he hugs her from behind. He softly calls out her name and pleads with her. Yunifer finds him hard to resist. She asks him if he promises that this would be the last time, and Ishid happily agrees. Water splashes around the two as Ishid pulls her around and hoists her up, with his hands on her hips. Yunifer feels drowsy, so Ishid tells her she can keep still if she is tired, and begins thrusting inside her. As Yunifer screams loudly in pleasure, her arms tightening around his shoulders, and the water around them keeps splashing everywhere, Ishid gasps in exhaustion as a flustered Yunifer looks at him. She reaches for his face. He clasps her hand and makes it cup his own face. He breathlessly calls out her name, his voice laced with absolute devotion. Yunifer responds with a broken, breathless moan. Placing her hand now on his chest, Ishid continues thrusting, and Yunifer's moans fill the room as he gently cups her face in his hands and tells her that he loves her. Much to her shock, his movements slowing as the storm of passion finally begins to settle, he leans down to press a soft, affectionate kiss onto her cheek as he repeats that he loves her. Yunifer goes to place a reassuring hand on the back of his neck, but comes to a halt. She rests her head back against the wall, staring up at the ceiling in a quiet, thoughtful, resigned daze as Ishid rests on her. She closes her eyes. The scene melts into their room as Yunifer sits up in bed, wrapped in a simple cloth, looking slightly exhausted as she turns to look at Ishid, who asks her if she is tired. Yunifer, annoyed, asks him what does he think. Ishid sits beside her with a completely submissive, downcast expression, slumping his shoulders dejectedly like a scolded pet. Yunifer's expression softens into a smile. Ishid asks her what the matter is. She cups his face with her hands and tells him he is very cute. Ishid looks at her in mild disbelief. His cheek flushes with embarrassment, and he feels like her little puppy wagging its tail. Suddenly, Ishid notices how scantily clad Yunifer is. He gets up from the bed and brings a robe, asking Yunifer if he could dress her up. Yunifer watches him walk away, sitting cross-legged on the mattress while crossing her arms and grumbling internally that she is definitely not a child who needs to be coddled. Ishid returns to her side, gently wrapping a warm, soft robe around her shoulders and telling her that it brings him pleasure. He meticulously ties the silk bow over her chest. He marvels at how such simple things bring him so much joy. Yunifer's gaze softens immediately, her eyelids growing heavy and relaxed as a deep wave of drowsiness washes over her. She yawns and tells him that he makes her happy too. She looks at his bare skin, peeking from within his shirt. With a satisfied smile, she covers him with a blanket. She tells him he should cover up, else he would get a cold. Ishid looks at her softly. He covers her with a blanket and asks her if he can sleep with her too. Yunifer readily agrees as Ishid blushes. He then asks her if he could cuddle with her. Yunifer instructs him to come closer, bringing her head flush against his chest. Yunifer snuggles deeply into his warmth, though she wonders sleepily to herself why it feels that she is the only one doing the snuggling. Then she realizes that Ishid is being gentle to not hurt her. She thinks it is very cute and asks him to sing a lullaby as she drifts off to sleep. In the dimly lit quiet room at night, glowing musical notes drift gracefully. Yunifer lies with her face pressed close to Ishid's bare chest, while the latter instantly recognizes the familiar melody from the music box. She snuggles deeply into his embrace as Ishid holds her tight, quietly addressing herself as his bamboo wife for the night. Ishid reacts with sudden, wide-eyed surprise at her comment. He repeats the phrase, questioning and a little confused. Yunifer looks up and details the function of a long bamboo bolster pillow, explaining how its hollow design keeps a sleeper perfectly cool during hot summer nights. She asks if she is just like that cooling bolster to him. He confirms his own thought with a wide, teasing grin, leaving a flustered Yunifer completely startled. Yunifer tightens her grip on his white shirt, her heart pounding rapidly against her chest. He wonders out loud how he would spend a month without her. He becomes glum that since the campaign returns 4 times every year, it would mean he has to spend 4 months without her. She quietly comments on the daunting length of his upcoming military expedition, while a somber aura surrounds Ishid as the text notes the relentless quarterly return of the monster campaign. Yunifer lets out a soft sigh, stating that they will simply have to manage a long-distance relationship for a while, which visibly shocks him. The phrase brings back a memory for Ishid. He recalls a friend crying at being dumped in a long-distance relationship. The friend said that out of sight, out of mind actually is true, while chugging his drink in despair as an annoyed Ishid watched. Ishid suddenly shakes himself out of his strange daydream, wondering to himself why such a bizarre thought even crossed his mind. He pulls her flush against his chest with an intensely serious expression, firmly promising to return to her side as quickly as humanly possible. She tells him she would write to him as frequently as the massive distance permits. Yunifer gently holds his arm, pointing out that both of them are bound to be incredibly busy once the monsoon season nears its end. She casually mentions the arrival of her new mentee at the clinic, explaining that she has to teach her the ropes, which immediately catches him off guard. Ishid's expression darkens with a sudden wave of deep possessiveness as he realizes someone else will be spending constant, intimate time with her during his long absence. Ishid grows glum and says he wishes he could do healing magic. Yunifer tells him she wishes she had his transportation magic. He dismisses her by saying he is not able to travel long distances with the magic. She notes with a serious expression that only a few rare people in history have ever been able to successfully use transport magic. Ishid closes his eyes tightly deeply, wishing to himself that he could secretly be her hospital mentee instead of an unknown silhouette. He visualizes a beautiful, vivid fantasy where he is a water mage happily manipulating floating elements of water alongside a laughing, proud Yunifer. The dream takes a chaotic turn as he imagines his volatile, destructive fire magic accidentally erupting and incinerating the entire room, and he gets kicked out. Ishid sinks into a dark, deeply depressed mood, staring downward as he laments his inherently destructive elemental nature. He says he would have preferred to be a water mage. Suddenly, a random thought causes him to instantly freeze in his tracks. Ishid stares blankly ahead, the concept of her working alongside another water mage echoing heavily in his mind. He glances down at her and asks to know the exact identity of her new hospital mentee. Yunifer looks at him calmly, answering that he most likely doesn't know the person. She smiles innocently, introducing her as Raelle, an old academy alumna who wanted to try out the clinic job. Ishid's mouth curves into a rigid, highly strained smile as he processes the information. A memory of Reincarnated standing gracefully in her uniform flashes vividly across his mind. He visualizes Raelle offering her umbrella to Yunifer outside the gates of the clinic. His thoughts sour completely at the realization that this woman will be occupying his rightful place next to Yunifer while he is gone. Back in the present, Ishid leans down closely, while an oblivious Yunifer turns her attention entirely to his hand. She takes hold of his hand gently, marveling at how incredibly long and elegant his fingers are. She studies his palm with deep interest, tracing the lines of his hand. She looks up at him playfully, asking if he has ever noticed a specific detail about his own hands. She matches her small hand against his, pointing out that his pinky nail is literally larger than her entire thumbnail. Ishid stares down at her, his intense green eyes filled with a sudden, overwhelming wave of heavy emotion. He firmly grips her hand back, interlocking his fingers tightly and securely with hers. He leans down completely, burying his face in the crook of her neck as he breathlessly confesses how much he is going to miss her. Yunifer rests quietly against him, her expression softening into a relaxed gaze. She breaks the heavy silence by gently asking what would happen if she simply packed her things and joined him on the campaign. Ishid immediately refuses the offer, his face hardening completely as he tells her she absolutely must not go. Yunifer looks at him directly, her brow furrowing as she demands a real reason for his stubbornness. Ishid counters firmly, explaining that the military mission is far too perilous, grueling, and physically demanding. Yunifer turns away slightly with a small pout, insisting that she is perfectly capable of fending for herself. Ishid acknowledges her immense power, so Yunifer demands a real reason for his refusal. Ishid pauses for a moment and then asks her if she has ever slept on the bare ground, without even a blanket underneath. He asks her a bunch of questions if she has ever experienced the harsh realities that are common in a military campaign. Yunifer answers in the negative. She looks down, dejected. Ishid hugs her and maintains that even with magic, it does not make the harsh reality of war any easier. Yunifer looks back at him, a little sad. She gazes intently at his bare chest, her hand resting lightly against his collarbone. She meets his intense green gaze and asks him what about him. Ishid looks down at her, startled by her sudden question. She says it must be dangerous and uncomfortable for him as well. Ishid freezes. He becomes uneasy and says he doesn't mind as he is used to it. She looks up at him innocently and says it must have been difficult when he first started out. Her expression turns somber as her mind drifts entirely into the shadows of his past. He was significantly younger than she is now when he first experienced the true horrors of the campaign, years before he ever entered the academy. A young, traumatized Ishida lies completely awake under a rough blanket in the dark, entirely unable to close his eyes from the horror. His tender skin was blistered from the relentless horse rides. A graphic close-up memory captures a hand heavily stained in thick, splattered crimson blood. Little Ishid stood completely isolated inside a murky, freezing body of water, staring blankly ahead into nothingness. He washed himself in the river when a monster attacked. It left him with a lingering trauma of being cruelly forced to take a life for the very first time, as a massive splash of blood was left behind. Back in the bedroom, Ishid drops his head heavily on the bed, his voice trembling as he struggles to find his words. He tells her that he is fine. Yunifer looks at him and reaches out for his face. She places her hand gently against his cheek, looking into his eyes with profound empathy and understanding. She smiles warmly, reassuring him that her very first campaign will naturally be much easier because he will be right there to protect her. Ishid is taken aback. She tells him that she knows it would be difficult too, as it had been difficult for him as well. Ishid leans his weight heavily into her soft palm, completely comforted and melted by her touch. Ishid whispers her name, his voice thick and completely overcome with raw emotion. He gazes into her eyes with pure reverence, admitting softly that she truly knows how to completely shake up his feelings. Ishida's fingers are digging firmly into the sheets as he trembles with emotion. He looks at her with deep vulnerability, asking her why she constantly makes him wish for more. Yunifer looks up at him with wide emotional eyes as she confesses that her only true desire is to be with him. She gently reaches out for his arms. Ishida's eyes fill with tears as he says that she is tearing his heart out. Yunifer's eyes widen in shock and confusion. She asks him why he is crying. He looks away and says that she made him cry. He looks back at her to observe her response. She lowers her head completely, bowing deeply before him on the mattress as she whispers that she has sinned and is deeply sorry. Ishid thinks that he wasn't being serious but notes that Yunifer looks extremely guilty. Ishid takes playful advantage and asks her if she would take responsibility. Yunifer sits up in her light blue robe, looking down at his submissive posture and gently asking what he wants her to do. Ishid clasps her hands in his and asks her to not let him go. Ishid keeps his head down, his intense green eyes filled with a desperate longing as he mutters that only then will he be able to sleep in peace. Yunifer gently puts her hands above his. The next morning, bright sunlight streams into the bedroom as Ishid sits up quietly, watching Yunifer sleep. He looks down suddenly as Yunifer kicks him with her knees in her sleep. A soft, incredibly affectionate smile breaks across his features as he looks at her sleeping face. He leans down over her sleeping form, cupping her face in his hands, and tells her that he has never woken up feeling more refreshed. Yunifer suddenly turns towards him, still sleeping, and nuzzles in his chest. She puts a hand across his waist, Ishid gently whispers that he has to leave for work. Yunifer's eyes flutter open, looking groggy and slightly disoriented as she lets out a quiet murmur. Suddenly, her eyes widen as she looks at Ishid sitting by her side. As the morning light fully illuminates his figure, she thinks what a beautiful sight she has woken up to. Ishid tells her to go back to sleep as it is still early. He looks down at her remorsefully, explaining that he unfortunately has official duties to attend to today. Yunifer shifts against the plush pillows, sleepily asking if he slept well and expressing concern that he might have been uncomfortable outside his own bed. Ishid assures her that he slept very soundly. Yunifer plants a kiss against his cheeks. She tells him that she slept well too, thanks to his warmth. She taps on her face and asks if he won't return the kiss. Ishid feels a little hesitant out of shyness. Then he leans down to press a tender goodbye kiss against her cheeks too. Yunifer beams brightly. Ishid stares at her smiling face in awe. He tells her he would see her later, and disappears into a flare of fire at the fireplace. The scene transitions sharply as Ishid manifests back into his room. His expression hardens into an unbothered stare as an icy voice greets him. Ishid asks the crown prince what he is doing here. A clear glass half filled with ice clinks loudly as liquid is poured inside. Crown Prince Cassian sits back in a grand chair, asking why he cannot be here. Ishid asks the servant to bring him his clothes as he has to leave for work. Cassian calmly drinks from the glass. He tells Ishid that the latter is practically beaming. Cassian smirks and says it must be the woman named Yunifer Magnolia. Ishid looks at him with deadly eyes. Cassian laughs at him while Ishid looks at him darkly. His green eyes are completely devoid of any humor. Cassian laughingly tells him to not look at him like that. He puts the glass on the table and says that nothing has been working out for him. He recalls the tense atmosphere of the grand office as his father, the king, let out a heavy frustrated sigh, asking if Cassian could do anything right ever. The king warned him to not forget that he is replaceable. Cassian clenched his fists behind his back. Cassian breaks out of his reverie and blames Ishid for messing everything up. Ishid notes that he sounds upset. Cassian laughs and says that the former sounds furious. Ishid instantly agrees, much to Cassian's annoyance. He defends himself, saying he hasn't done anything wrong, and that Yunifer is the one who struck him. Ishid's eyes narrow coldly at this statement. He asks Cassian if the latter has forgotten something. He looms over the prince and tells him that he had warned him to think twice before taking her name. Cassian demands a clear answer about what is special about her, stepping forward to challenge his authority. Ishid stands completely immovable, saying that he cannot allow Cassian. He crosses his arms tightly over his bare chest, matching the prince's anger with absolute composure. Cassian grits his teeth and says he is not sure if Ishid still considers him a friend. Ishid is mildly surprised and says that surely the prince is aware that their equation is not that of friendship. Cassian looks down and calls Ishid insufferable, while Ishid is still composed yet confused. This ticks Cassian, and he calls him a demon spawn and marches away, bumping shoulders with Ishid on the way. The silver-haired servant returns with Ishid's coat, only to be surprised at an angry Cassian walking away, who then slams the door behind him. But the servant looks at Ishid with nervous concern, who stands darkly in the room. A close-up shows the trembling knees and blue fabric of a child's academy uniform, adorned with a bright red bow. A young Ishid crouches on the stone floor, his wide eyes full of sheer terror as he shakes and hears that he should not have been born. His eyes focus on a knot, as the shadow of his dead father hanging falls on him. Ishid calls out his father, with a trembling voice and eyes full of tears. A towering, violent pillar of fire crackles his father's body, as little Ishid curls into a ball, desperately shielding his ears. Suddenly, he flinches as someone calls out his name from behind. He turns to look around. His mother staggers forward unsteadily, her clothing singed and her hair disheveled as she glares down at him. She leans directly into his face, her expression completely unhinged and weeping, as she demands to know why he burned her. Ishid gasps. The room fills with his desperate, tearful apologies to his mother, who screams as she is engulfed by an explosion of roaring, destructive flames. It was all a dream as a teenager. Ishid wakes up from his sleep with a jolt. He pants heavily and sits with his head in his hands. The scene cuts to a new day at the academy, with whispering voices from his classmates echoing around, questioning the identity of the dangerous, dark-haired boy standing next to the crown prince. Cassian looked back at him with a cocky smirk, teasing him about how incredibly popular he seems to be. Ishid turned to look at the whispering voices. The students froze in terror as soon as they saw him looking at them, and turned away. Ishid notes that people have always looked upon him with a heavy mixture of fear and awe as distant shadows avoid his path. He bitterly reflects that time did absolutely nothing to change the way the world viewed him. Cassian walked alongside him, cheering aloud that they only have one single year left before escaping the academy. He placed a hand on Ishida's shoulder, asking him to go and check the first years with him. But Ishida brushed his hand off, saying that he wasn't interested. Cassian called him boring and walked away. Ishida rested his hand flat against a tree trunk. He was reading a book, sitting completely isolated in the peaceful grass beneath the shade of a large tree. A close-up shows a pair of legs in dark loafers and white socks walking slowly through the grass. Ishida notices her approach as she steps on the grass towards the tree. A young first-year Yunifer dry heaves on the other side of the tree trunk, feeling unwell. Ishida notices her, dryly identifying her as a newly arrived first-year student. He observes her uniform, assuming she belongs to nobility and that her family servants will inevitably pick her up soon. Yunifer buries her face in her knees, quietly calling out for her mother. She sniffs and grumbles about what she is doing there and why she cannot wake up, while Ishida views her as an annoying obstacle. She whimpers out for her father, continuing to weep in her isolation. She calls out for her father. She whispers that she feels cold. Ishida shuts his book and proceeds to walk away, thinking that Yunifer won't shut up anytime soon. He rushes past her, but suddenly turns around. As Yunifer grabs his hand, he looks down at his palm, completely stunned as he senses a strange, cooling energy radiating from her to him. A gentle aura of water mana wraps around his hand, instantly soothing his intensely high body temperature. Yunifer tells him to save her as she drops into the grass. His intense green eyes widen completely in pure fascination at the sensation. He drops the book on the ground and takes Yunifer in his arms. He notes that people normally ask for help instead of saving. He turns her head around and thinks about how there are only 2 water mages in the first year, and that she must be the daughter of Count Magnolia, whose wife had passed away earlier. He brushes his fingers against her face, noting how cool she feels. He rationalizes the cooling sensation to himself, realizing it must be because she is a water mage. A brilliant, soft fire mana radiates from his hand to her head. Yunifer slowly regains consciousness. Ishida watches her. Suddenly, Yunifer's servants call out. It is Rosie and a butler. Ishida shoves Yunifer towards Rosie, startling her and remarking that she won't die from it. Rosie looks at Ishida in nervous shock and tries to thank him while he leaves. Even after several days, the water mana lingered behind in Ishida's hands. Ishida grew more thoughtful. The scene cuts to a brand new day at the academy. He asks a student in the courtyard, asking a fellow male student who is a water mage for a favor. The terrified student stands before him, trembling and stammering out a tense response. The boy panics completely, screaming in absolute horror at an unspoken threat. Ishida looks at him with deadpan intensity, calmly asking if the boy can lend him a hand. The student shakes violently, trying to clarify if the Duke wants his hand cut off. Ishida continues to glare at him with an unwavering, completely hollow green gaze. The boy apologizes for overreacting. Ishida assures him that he only wants to feel his water mana. The boy is taken aback at his request for a mana exchange. Ishida keeps glaring at him steadily without any emotion, so the boy nervously agrees. He submissively extends his trembling hands to exchange energy. Ishida feels something. Suddenly, he swirls around and says that was enough. The boy is left behind, confused, as Ishida thanks him while walking away. Ishida notes that all water mages feel cold the same way as Yunifer did, and that she was not special or different. And with that final thought, he swiftly and completely forgot all about her. The story cuts to a bright new day at the library inside the academy. A close-up focuses on a pair of elegant hands opening a thick, dark hardcover book inside the academy library. It is the schoolboy Ishida, who stands hidden behind a tall wooden bookshelf crammed with volumes, looking down at his pages. He suddenly realizes that someone else is there. An agitated Yunifer slowly moves through the library. She is nervous and sweating. Ishida quietly notes that it is Magnolia once again. He thinks to himself that he hopes she won't turn up every time he reads a book. Suddenly, Yunifer jolts straight as someone calls out her name. She sits on the floor of the library, wondering how the caller found her. She thinks out loud that she does not need to hide. Ishida is startled a little at her changing loud thoughts. Yunifer yells to herself that she did not do anything wrong, with a look of determination. Ishida remains stunned, as he recollects how sick she looked near the tree the other day, while she looks like a completely different person now. The mystery caller turns out to be Raelle, who confronts Yunifer as the latter had asked for a change of rooms. Their conversation carries on. In the end, Raelle trails off, saying that Yunifer is not close to Michelle either. Yunifer could not hear her, so Raelle suddenly covers her mouth, surprised at her own words, and says that it was nothing. She tells Yunifer that she has to go now, and runs away. Yunifer talks to herself, thinking that she should have been more subtle. Ishida quietly notes everything, He thinks to himself that Raelle wanted Yunifer to follow her. While watching Raelle run away through the halls, he turns his attention back to the book, flipping a page. Suddenly, after a while, Ishid wonders why Yunifer grew so quiet. He walks and goes over to her, only to see, shocked, that Yunifer was sitting on the ground, sleeping, resting against the shelf. He thinks she was so anxious a few minutes ago, while Yunifer sleeps on peacefully. He looks down thoughtfully, mentally tracking how bizarre the odds are that he first found her fainting, and now finds her completely asleep. Yunifer seemed a little agitated in her sleep. Ishid kneels down beside her sleeping form, his gaze softening with rare tenderness as his hand hovers near her face. He silently reflects that she must be completely exhausted to fall asleep in a place like this. Suddenly, he realizes something and jolts upright. He stomps towards the librarian, announcing that there is a girl lying completely unconscious right in front of section E13. He walks away, saying that the librarian should check on her. The librarian gets up and approaches Yunifer, asking if she is all right. A close-up captures Ishid's shoes swiftly walking away from the scene to avoid detection. He retreats deep into the shadows of the aisles, reassuring himself that it is much better to leave things this way. He recalls being younger and standing beside Cassian before the king, who had taught them not to make anything their weakness, and they must choose death over prizing their weakness. Cassian sweated nervously, while Ishid took those words to heart. Now he pauses behind a pillar, internally noting that it was an incredibly close call. The story cuts to a new day at the academy as Cassian looks over at a group of girls on the playground from his classroom window. He urges Ishid to come and take a look, who sits in the classroom with a book before him. Cassian calls out again, with more force this time. Ishid sighs. He rises and goes to stand next to Cassian. He is shocked to see Yunifer in the crowd below, along with Raelle beside her. Yunifer was smiling, and Ishid noted that. Suddenly, Cassian notices Ishid's face and shockingly remarks if Ishid is into the girl too. Ishid brushes him off. His eyes are fixed on Yunifer. Suddenly, Yunifer feels his gaze and looks up directly at him. Immediately, he slams the window shut, much to Cassian's agitation, and walks away, saying that the latter should not disturb them. Cassian tells him that he was only watching them and not disturbing, and neither was he the only one watching those two famous girls. With irritated eyes, he tells Ishid the entire academy knows they are considered the best-looking individuals around. Suddenly, Cassian turns around furiously with a loud shout, demandingly ordering Ishid to tell him exactly which person he prefers. When Ishid remains quiet, Cassian starts talking about himself, saying that he prefers Reincarnated. Ishid walks away unbothered as Cassian shouts at him from behind to tell him which person he prefers. Ishid notes to himself with resigned eyes that it felt deeply unpleasant to note that other people were watching Yunifer too. His mind suddenly begins filling up with terrifying curses from his father and nightmares about his mother. But at the sound of footsteps approaching, he is broken out of his reverie. He visualizes a dejected Yunifer standing before him, saying that she should have never met him. Ishid freezes in pure shock. The story cuts to a new scene focusing on Ishid's clenched fists. He is having a nightmare as he struggles to assure someone. Then the story focuses back into a new day at the academy. A close-up captures Ishid's feet clad in clean loafers stepping forward down the polished academy hallway. From the opposite direction, by coincidence, Yunifer too walks towards him in her dainty shoes. Ishid recognizes the footsteps and thinks he should stop before he runs into that person again. But Yunifer was already there, running, as she comes to a sudden halt before Ishid. Her eyes widened in shock, with her expression full of absolute wonder as she stares up at him in sheer awe. Ishid looks back at her, returning her sparkling gaze. Ishid looks down at her with a completely blank, startled expression, his dark hair falling over his forehead. A close-up captures the edge of a dark leather shoe tripping forward onto the polished floorboards. She is about to fall, but Ishid's hand reaches out quickly, his fingers wrapping firmly and securely around her wrist to pull her back. She completely stumbles and bumps directly against his frame. Yunifer looks up in an absolute panic, her face flushing crimson as she frantically stammers out a thank you. Ishid stands completely frozen in place, a heavy silence falling over him as he struggles internally to find the right words to say. He remains mute, desperately wondering to himself why his mouth won't open to tell her that he is glad she isn't hurt. Yunifer quickly pulls herself away and takes a step back, politely thanking him for helping her. Ishid turns his head away sharply, looking down with a flush of embarrassment as he mutters a flat, dismissive response. He is silently berating himself out of fear that his cold tone made him sound entirely too arrogant. A dark blood-red tinted flashback captures the heavy trauma of his curse, visualizing a shadow of Yunifer saying that she should never have met him. The massive distance between them remains as they stand at opposite ends of the Stark Academy hallway. Ishid thinks he would be graduating in a week, and she should have never met him. Yunifer notices his badge and realizes he is a fifth year. Her eyes are shining with joy as she happily declares to herself that she is in luck. Ishid pauses, completely confused by her reaction, as he recalls the cruel whispers of the Academy students who were once calling him a monster. Yunifer clasps her hands together excitedly, stepping back toward him with a bright, sparkling look of sheer admiration. She asks him his name, while Ishid glares back at her with deadpan intensity, lost in recalling the malicious gossip surrounding his name. Yunifer asks if he doesn't want to tell her his name. Completely oblivious to his darkness, she is cheerfully smiling as she offers to introduce herself, since he won't speak. She breaks into a massive, radiant grin, her bright blue bow framing her happy face perfectly, and tells him that her name is Yunifer Magnolia. Ishid stares down at her. As he begins to speak, someone calls out his name. Upon hearing that name, Yunifer covers her mouth in horror and clumsily announces that she needs to leave. She hastily turns her back on him and runs away down the hallway, leaving a completely stunned Ishid standing alone in the light, dejected. A close-up shows the steady movement of legs walking side by side down the corridor. Crown Prince Cassian suddenly appears next to him, a cocky smile on his face as he casually drapes his arm over Ishid's shoulder as he acknowledges that Ishid likes the brunette. Cassian chuckles playfully, patting his back and teasing that he was genuinely worried they might end up becoming romantic rivals. He tries to recall her name, and successfully recalls that it is Yunifer Magnolia. Ishid's expression sours instantly as he coldly calls out Cassian and warns him to not take her name. Cassian feels the pressure of Ishid's mana and flinches back with his hand. He asks Ishid if the latter is crazy. Ishid looks at him, unbothered. He walks away without a single word, burying his hands in his pockets in complete indifference. Cassian is left standing completely dumbfounded in the middle of the hallway, staring blankly at the Duke's retreating back while asking him to stop. The long flashback transitions back into the current timeline. In the present day, Yunifer sits in her room looking thoroughly exhausted, her shoulders slumped in a deep pout. She recalls a frantic memory of her maids aggressively scrubbing and washing her like a piece of laundry to get her ready in time. Yunifer rubs her cheeks tiredly with both hands, groaning to herself that it is no wonder she feels completely drained today. She stares down at her lap, lost deep in her own complicated thoughts about their relationship, thinking that maybe last night is to be blamed instead. Suddenly, as she is about to remove her coat, she recalls Ishid's confession of love. She stands heavily, wondering how she had allowed herself to grow so careless. She looks down and visualizes Ishid with Raelle. She knows if she tries to play Cupid now, things would not go smoothly. A frosted, icy state of mind visual of Ishid gives her a logical conclusion that it is always best to end a relationship before things get too deep. Then she thinks about the possibility that Raelle was not meant for Ishid, but she is still hesitant if her current feelings will inevitably blossom into a deeper love. She notes to herself that while it is happening much faster than she planned, she must make a final decision. She thinks that the upcoming military campaign is the perfect opportunity for that. She also realizes that Raelle would have to accompany her as she is her new mentee. She feels confused as to how she would approach Raelle and ask her to accompany her after treating her so harshly the day before. The thought shatters as she clutches her head in absolute frustration, screaming to herself that executing a clean break is practically impossible. Back in reality, someone calls out her name. Raelle approaches her with a deeply worried expression, noting that she was concerned about her. Yunifer quickly rubs the back of her neck, offering a wide, nervous smile as she apologizes for oversleeping. Raelle kindly notes that she must have been tired. Yunifer asks her if she wants to say something. Raelle says that she does not want to bother her, but hands out a clipboard to her. Yunifer's eyes widen. It shows a note requesting medical assistance from the Order of White Knights for their upcoming campaign. She considers the timing carefully, realizing that this situation actually presents a perfect opportunity for her plans. Raelle reiterates that she doesn't want to bother Yunifer. Yunifer thinks for a moment if Ishid, Raelle and her together, going on the campaign would be a good idea. She looks at Raelle's expecting face and thinks about how things could get more complicated. She clenches her fist in determination. Finally, Yunifer happily tells Raelle that the latter may go for the campaign, as she herself wanted to go as well. Raelle was overjoyed to hear that. She stands before Yunifer, looking slightly anxious as she admits she was worried Yunifer would be overwhelmed if she went, leaving her unsure of what to do. She admits before Yunifer that it makes her really happy. She asks her if she would turn the latter's document in when she turns her own in. Yunifer tells her to just put her name as a part of Raelle's own group. Raelle nervously asks if Yunifer does not want to apply independently. Yunifer says she is sure about not applying independently as she would have to accompany Raelle anyway as her mentor. Raelle looks at her, struggling to say something but stays quiet ultimately. Yunifer takes her pen and signs her name on Raelle's document, while the latter blushes. After Yunifer signs, Raelle tells her that she would submit the document right away and walks away. As she walks away happily, she blushes thinking how she and Yunifer would be together on the campaign. She also thinks to himself how she could not tell Yunifer that the clinic training might get postponed until after the campaign, which means their time together at the campaign would not count towards the 1-month training which Raelle is undertaking under Yunifer. Raelle blushes thinking that this would mean she gets to spend even more time with Yunifer. She reads the exact details written on the application form, explicitly listing Reincarnated as the applicant and Yunifer Magnolia as her companion, both noted as water sourcers under a clause about postponing clinic training until after the campaign. Her striking purple eyes are filled with a soft, reflective expression as her silver braid rests against her back. She takes a glance behind and watches Yunifer talking to Martha, wondering if she should tell her about the postponement, but ultimately decides against it since Yunifer said that she wanted to go anyway. She walks away. The scene cuts sharply to the military headquarters, where a junior knight, Conrad, announces before Ishid that a response from Lady Carnia has officially arrived for the captain. He says that the response is affirmative. Before he can take the name of the companion, Ishid, who is busy with some paperwork at his desk, asks Conrad to approve it. Conrad looks at Yunifer's name on the paper and realizes that it is his captain, Ishid's lover. A realization hits him as he realizes the captain may have chosen Raelle to disguise his intent of bringing Yunifer to the campaign. He blushes, thinking that Ishid is embarrassed to directly request for Yunifer before his subordinates. Meanwhile, Ishid, busy with his paperwork, thinks that it is so easy to separate Raelle from Yunifer by bringing the former to the campaign. Conrad happily puts a stamp of approval over the document. Conrad seems pleased with himself, thinking that stamping this document with approval would ensure that his captain can enjoy the springtime in his heart. The view transitions sharply, with a heavy splash of water, signaling a change in location as a carriage moves through wet terrain. It comes to a halt as a well-dressed Yunifer gets down from it to greet Ishid. She asks if he has been well. Ishid replies in the affirmative and asks about her. Yunifer controls her laughter, realizing that Ishid is just repeating her question. She sniffs and pretends to be agitated, saying that she has not been well as she has missed him. Ishid freezes instantly, his sharp green eyes widening in absolute, breathless surprise at her unexpected words. His face tenses with a sudden rush of emotion as he struggles to process her sudden shift in demeanor, stammering out that he has not been well either, as he has missed her too. Yunifer secretly laughs and says that he has changed his answer. Ishid affirms that it is the truth. Yunifer gasps and asks if that means his previous answer was a lie. Ishid is confused and put on the spot. A massive, mischievous wave of laughter takes over Yunifer as she waves her hand dismissively, breaking into a hearty, mischievous chuckle and teasing him for being so incredibly easy to play with. Suddenly, she stops and asks him why he is holding on to her dress. Ishid tells her it is because he did not want it to get wet, as it may get stained due to the puddles formed on the road after rain. Ishid secretly thinks to himself that he does not want her to go back, in case her dress gets wet. Yunifer assures him that she has spare clothes, taking him by surprise. She tells him that she wants to hold his hands while walking. Ishid is still processing her words, wondering if she brought extra clothes with the intent of staying over. The thought of Yunifer lying on his bed in her nightgown flusters Ishid. Meanwhile, Yunifer wonders why Ishid looks so happy all of a sudden, yet unmoving. She asks if he does not want to hold her hand. Ishid quickly confirms that he does. As he lifts his hand to hold hers, a section of her gown is also lifted up. Yunifer processes the action and wonders if this is his idea of seduction. Ishid nervously apologizes, noting that the hem of her gown is entangled with the cuff of his sleeves, and says that he would untangle it at the earliest. As he tries to untangle it, much to his horror, a portion of the dress is ripped off. Yunifer calls him a beast. Ishid apologizes, but she tells him that it is fine as she was about to change anyway. Ishid's face turns red, wondering why she was about to change so soon. Yunifer asks what does he mean by saying that it is too early. Ishid takes a moment to frame his answer and says that it has not been long since she has arrived, so he is wondering what is her intent behind planning to change into something else so soon. Suddenly, Yunifer bursts into the frame with a frantic expression, shouting to herself that she should have asked this first. A close-up captures Ishid's face as he looks down with a quiet question. Yunifer looks up at him with a pleading expression and begins a question. The story cuts to a scene where Yunifer stands tall outside, proudly clad in a crisp white and yellow riding uniform, while firmly holding the leather reins of a large brown horse. She apologizes and assures him they can do something else if he doesn't like this. Ishid assures her that he likes this. He thinks to himself that he was only taken aback for a moment because he had pictured them doing something else on his bed. She narrows her eyes at his reverie, directly asking if he isn't forcing himself. She pouts suspiciously, and Ishid tells her that he is happy to do whatever she wants. Yunifer tells him that she had forgotten to ask him if he wanted to guide her for horse riding because she was so sure about it, as he was the only one reliable enough. Ishid blushes at the use of the word reliable. Yunifer adds that while her athleticism is not too bad, she is still a little rusty when it comes to horse riding. Ishid asks her why she is eager to practice this. Yunifer says it is for the campaign, much to his horror. Yunifer looks up at him with clear blue eyes, asking if he was unaware that she turned in a formal participant application. Ishid fumes in rage and disbelief as he recalls his assistant happily approving the document with his stamp. Ishid tells her that whoever withheld her name from him would feel his wrath. Yunifer mentally fears that he may burn her application. She calls out his name and lowers her head with a soft, slightly downcast expression, softly asking if he simply doesn't like the idea of going with her. Ishid shakes his head and vehemently denies that. Yunifer extends her pinky and asks for a promise from him to not make an issue out of this. Ishid is in a dilemma, but grows weak before her sparkling, pleading eyes. He finally gives in, sweating, and promises her. Yunifer's face first quivers into a smile of success. She then breaks into a bright, heavily flushed smile, her cheeks turning bright red with happiness. Ishid realizes he was tricked. He feels betrayed while Yunifer laughs cheekily. A split panel captures their lower bodies standing close together side by side in their matching riding gear. She asks him for help. Ishid sighs and reluctantly agrees. Yunifer is reminded of her parents. Noticing his look of disappointment, she tells him it won't be dangerous and that she would pull her own weight. She adds that she would stick to him and looks at him with glittering eyes, which completely melts Ishid's resolve. She grabs him in an embrace and says the place next to him is the safest in the world. She asks him if that is true or not. Ishid looks at her nervously and tells her that he would protect her with his life. Yunifer sweats at his over-enthusiastic reassurance, but maintains a smile. The scene cuts to Yunifer tying her hair up in a ponytail and asks for the reins of the horse from Ishid, who ogles at her. He tells her that it is his first time seeing her with her hair tied up. She flashes a charming grin and asks him if he likes it. Ishid calls her lovely. Yunifer basks in the warmth of his affection, her heart beating fast. With a tickle, she notices that it has been tickling again in the presence of Ishid. She blushes and says that they should get going. She mounts the horse like an expert. While Ishid watches her heroic lighting, he relaxes, thinking that there will not be any chances of her getting injured from a fall. Suddenly, Yunifer notices that Ishid's face looks really warm and red. She asks him if he has the mana crystals she gave him. Ishid asks if she needs them. Yunifer tells him that he looks like he himself needs them, and tells him he would feel refreshed if he puts them around his neck. Ishid looks down sadly and says that he has already used up the mana she had put inside those crystals, and they are back at home. She tells him not to worry as she is here now, and says that she has already told him that she would charge it for him anytime. Ishid beams. Suddenly, there is a loud noise as Raelle comes in, flapping its huge wings, with a pendant carrying a crystal in its beak. Yunifer greets her, but just then, the horse panics at the sight of Raelle's huge figure and neighs so loudly while Yunifer finds herself falling. The horse reared back in panic, its reins pulling taut as chaos erupted without warning. The sudden commotion threw Yunifer completely off balance, stealing her breath in an instant. Her face pales in horror. But before disaster could fully strike, Yunifer realized that she was living out a familiar trope from countless storybooks and romance novels. She understood that a frightened horse galloping off in a frenzy, only for the hero to skillfully ride in and save the day, was an essential cliché that could never be left out of a proper story. She squeezes her eyes shut, awaiting the impending doom. But when nothing happened, she opened her eyes to take a peek. Much to her relief, Ishid had calmed the horse down and was caressing its face. After steadying the horse with practiced authority, Ishid gently asked Yunifer if she was all right. Frozen, wide-eyed, and utterly stunned, Yunifer recognized in that moment that Ishid was dangerously and frustratingly competent. As Ishid looks down lovingly at the horse, Yunifer quietly acknowledged a simple truth to herself. She knew that being beside Ishid was the safest place she could ever be. Hoofbeats echoed across the landscape as Ishid and Yunifer galloped through sun-dappled fields, the steady and peaceful rhythm drumming beneath them. Yunifer estimated that more than an hour had passed since their ride began, and with every hoofbeat, she was mercilessly feeling the toll. Through gritted teeth, she noted that the saddle felt like a weapon against every bounce and jostle. She told herself that this practice session was probably a good idea, considering they were scheduled to endure more than 10 days of riding very soon. Gripping her reins tighter, she desperately considered a solution, imagining how wonderful a soft, forgiving green gel cushion would be. Meanwhile, as the ride continued, Ishid noticed that Yunifer's upper body was looking tired and that her thighs were trembling slightly. He concluded that she was quietly pushing herself to her limits without a single complaint. Tapping his horse's flank, he called her name. After Yunifer softly acknowledged him, Ishid smiled easily and suggested they stop for lunch. Yunifer paused, looking up at the wide blue sky and murmuring the word lunchtime under her breath as if she were tasting it. After stealing a measured look at Ishid, a jolt of realization struck her like a thunderclap. Ishid was hungry. She immediately spurred her horse forward and asked him, wide-eyed, if he was hungry, to which he simply confirmed that he was. As they rode side by side through the towering trees, a flustered and guilty Yunifer launched into an immediate apology. Unbothered, Ishid smiled and calmly reassured her that it was perfectly fine. Yunifer rummaged through her bag, reassuring herself that she had at least packed something small. Still, the self-reproach ate at her. She harshly asked herself why she could never manage to think of others before herself. Triumphantly producing 2 wrapped bundles in a warm golden glow, she asked Ishid whether he preferred tuna or ham. He replied that both were acceptable, but quickly pointed out that it would be far better if they dismounted first. Genuinely confused, Yunifer asked if eating on horseback wasn't exactly how meals were handled during a campaign, determined not to be a burden. Ishid, seeing clearly that she was pushing herself too hard, gave a flat refusal. When Yunifer questioned his denial, he calmly clarified that she had been misinformed and explained that when they took a rest, they needed to do it properly and comfortably. Yunifer pushed back in disbelief, claiming that wasn't true and stating that she had heard a different story. Ishid simply promised that she would see for herself. Bringing their horses to a halt, Yunifer reluctantly agreed, conceding that he probably knew best. As she teetered while balancing the food, Ishid gently instructed her to climb down carefully. When she attempted to descend, she realized he was blocking her path by holding her, prompting her to point out that his words and actions were in conflict. As her feet finally touched the ground, Ishid sincerely explained that he had only held her so she could dismount safely, insisting it was nothing more than help. And then it happened. Yunifer felt an unexpectedly loud heartbeat that was impossible to ignore. Flustered, she asked herself what this feeling was, while Ishid stared at her with a slight smile during a heavy, wordless silence. Holding out the 2 wrapped lunches side by side, Yunifer waited as Ishid made his choice. She thought he would probably like the right one. He opted for the one on the left, noting that it was bigger. Spotting a large, flat boulder, he declared it to be the perfect place to eat, and Yunifer enthusiastically agreed. She embarrassingly realized that her heart had simply been caught off guard by Ishid's beauty. Giving herself a firm internal command to pull it together, she shook her head to clear her thoughts and continued toward the boulder. The horse began eating grass as Ishid and Yunifer relaxed on the boulders. Suddenly, Ishid swiftly took one of the wrapped bundles, causing Yunifer to gasp. Pouting slightly in confusion, she notes mentally that the one he took was hers and that the other belonged to him. Ishid unwrapped the sandwich and offered it to her, prompting a quiet breath of surprise from Yunifer. She realized that Ishid was only opening the wrapping for her, and it was a small, careless act of kindness that touched her deeply. As she watched him quietly chewing, she thought he looked unbearably cute, much like a squirrel. They ate peacefully, surrounded by the rustling leaves, until Ishid asked her why she was eating so quickly. Managing a half-choked explanation around a full mouth, Yunifer swallowed hard and stated that speed was simply a necessity when traveling. Ishid questioned this logic, gently reminding her that they had plenty of time and warning her that eating too fast might cause indigestion. Grudgingly, Yunifer acknowledged his point, admitting that getting sick would be inconvenient for everyone. While Ishid gazed up at the wide blue sky, Yunifer triumphantly announced that she was finished. A slightly stunned Ishid asked if she was already done. He looked at the crumbs on her face before bursting into laughter. He finally offered her his hand and wiped her mouth. Drawn close in that light-filled moment, they shared a long, suspended look, holding something unspoken between them like a held breath. As her heart pounded once more, Yunifer helplessly asked herself what on earth was wrong with her that day. Muttering worriedly under her breath, she concluded that this was a bad sign. She quietly and honestly admitted to herself that if the time ever came when she had to send a shit away, she didn't know if she would be capable of doing it anymore. Suddenly, Ishid's steps came to a halt. Overhearing her mumbling, Ishid suddenly asked where he was being sent. Turning a steady gaze toward her, Ishid stated quietly and with absolute certainty that his place was right there. Staring into his intense look, Yunifer is completely paralyzed, realizing she has made a massive mistake. Swallowing hard, Yunifer internally panics, admitting she got this entire situation completely wrong. She flashes back to when a crying Ishid confessed his love, realizing his emotional vulnerability totally fooled her. But looking at his sharp, slitted eyes right now, she blames herself for thinking a powerful archmage could be easily managed. Through the mental image of a cute chibi graphic, she notes that wild beasts are still beasts, no matter how sweet they act when they're happy. She realizes her fatal error that she didn't consider what happens when you try to take what a predator cherishes most. He will absolutely flip in a heartbeat. Cue her mental image of Ishid exploding into a giant black lion of ultimate rage, sending everyone running in pure terror. Sweating bullets, Yunifer decides to play completely dumb, and forces a bright smile to play innocent, nervously asking him what he could possibly mean. They maintain an awkward silence. Yunifer nervously asks if he is upset because of what she said earlier, internally crying about how terrifying he is. Looking downcast, Ishid confronts her directly, asking if she actually planned on staying with him, or if she truly had no intention to. Trying to diffuse the tension, Yunifer chimes in and asks if he meant keeping her by his side instead of sending her back home. The word completely throws Ishid off, and he just echoes the word home in absolute utter confusion. She softly admits that while she knows she eventually has to go back home, just the thought of leaving him makes her incredibly sad, leaving Ishid totally stunned. Realizing she has the upper hand, Yunifer playfully crosses her arms and teases him, asking if he wasn't planning on letting her go home either. Mirking, she leans in and jokingly demands to know where on earth he learned to do such smooth, romantic things. Yunifer smirks playfully, starting to trail off as she watches his flustered reaction. Ishid completely spaces out, vividly imagining a wild scenario where she actually stays the night over at his place. Coming back to reality, Ishid internally admits to himself that her accusation about him wanting to keep her there isn't entirely false. Breaking his train of thought, Yunifer boldly slides her hands right onto his waist. She leans in teasingly and asks if he'd honestly prefer her not to leave, jokingly suggesting they just practice camping out in the woods right now. The joke completely breaks Ishida's brain, and he immediately starts running a serious mental checklist for survival gear, food, and shelter. Realizing he took her obvious joke 100% seriously, Yunifer snaps out of her smug mood and looks up at him in pure shock. She completely breaks character and bursts out laughing at just how intensely rigid and literal he is being. Giggling to herself, Yunifer reassures him that while she would honestly love to stay with him, she genuinely has to head back home for the day. She casually drops that she has someone currently waiting for her back home. Ishid's expression goes completely dark as he repeats her words, aggressively thinking what bastard he needs to go murder. Totally unfazed, Yunifer cheerfully reveals that the person waiting is actually just her father. A completely blindsided Ishid instantly stammers, nervously clarifying if she means the Count himself. Forcing a highly anxious smile, Ishid internally panics over the murderous thoughts he just had, before quickly playing it cool and agreeing that her father must indeed be waiting. Yunifer happily notes how concerned her dad seemed, internally realizing it's purely because he knew she was going out with Ishid today. She thinks back to a quick flashback of her dad closely watching her leave from the estate window. She smiles awkwardly, recalling how he hilariously slammed the curtain shut the exact second they made eye contact. Yunifer mentally reminds herself that she needs to use this chance to bring up the upcoming military campaign once she gets back to the estate. The scene ends with a deeply downcast Ishid staring blankly into space, utterly depressed by the harsh reality that his girlfriend really has to go home. Seeing Ishid completely sulking, Yunifer gently pats his leg to reassure him and comfort his bruised spirits. She cheerfully points out a massive silver lining, noting that once they deploy on the upcoming campaign, they'll get to sleep under the exact same sky together for at least a whole month. Shifting the conversation, Yunifer looks up at the open horizon and softly asks Ishid if he actually enjoys looking at the sky. Ishid admits he never really gave it much thought before, but confesses that he has recently found himself staring up at it quite often. Yunifer brightly declares her own love for it, raising her hands toward the clouds. Framing the horizon with her fingers, she poetically explains that looking at the view like this makes her feel as if she's genuinely touching the clouds and the stars. She beautifully adds that if someone tracks 1,000 mornings and nights this way, they've touched 1,000 unique moments, because the sky looks completely different every single day. Staring at the sky, Ishid looks on with a soft, emotional expression, completely captivated by her beautiful outlook on life. Yunifer coaxes Ishid to give her perspective a shot and try framing the horizon himself. Intrigued, Ishid lifts his hands and copies her exact gesture, looking out at the clouds through his fingers. Yunifer is instantly impressed, marveling at how absolutely perfect and precise his finger frame is. She internally attributes his incredibly sharp angles to his strict military background before playfully praising him for being naturally good at everything he does. She tells him that he is good at this too. As they both peer through the frame together, Yunifer softly tells him to take a close look at the beautiful view. She heavily whispers that right now, they are already sharing the exact same sky. Before he can even process her words, Ishid leans all the way in, catching her completely off guard with a sudden passionate kiss. Yunifer's eyes fly wide in pure shock as her face flushes a deep red. She pulls him towards herself as she shuts her eyes and melts right into the embrace. As the kiss deepens, Yunifer is completely lost in the romance, her eyes tightly shut as a heavy blush spreads across her face. Ishid pulls her entirely against him, protectively cradling her neck as their passionate embrace takes over the scene. Amidst the heat of the moment, Yunifer's logical side suddenly kicks in, and she mentally warns herself that letting things get this deep is dangerous since she will eventually have to let him go. Sensing her subtle hesitation, Ishid's grip instantly tightens, fiercely squeezing her outfit as if he is terrified she will slip away. The reality around them completely fades into a dark, scratchy void, overridden by Ishid's deep-rooted trauma as an echoing, desperate plea to never leave him completely fills his mind. Cut to later that evening at the sprawling Magnolia family estate, where the peaceful, starlit night sky completely changes the tone of the chapter. Standing right inside the heavy iron gates, a completely exhausted Yunifer winces in sheer exhaustion, massaging her incredibly sore arm and groaning about how much her entire body aches after the exhausting practice of the day. Yunifer suddenly spots her father swiftly walking away toward the mansion doors. She waves her arm and loudly calls out to him, but her dad breaks into a nervous sweat and tries his absolute best to ignore her. Yunifer breaks into a sprint, repeatedly shouting for him to stop, but he stubbornly keeps walking away. Seeing him completely block her out, Yunifer's eye twitches as absolute rage takes over. She drops a massive ultimatum, screaming that she has something vital to tell him and will be waiting right outside his bedroom door if he doesn't stop. The threat works like a charm. Her father instantly freezes right in his tracks. Her dad quickly struts back over, only to find a completely spent Yunifer leaning heavily against his arm, huffing and puffing for air. Her father gasps in absolute shock as she looks up at him with a totally gaunt, exhausted face. Taking in her trembling knees and disheveled look, her dad deeply panics, frantically asking her what is wrong and if she is seriously ill. Yunifer frantically waves her hands defensively, quickly reassuring him that she is completely fine, then just accidentally overdid things a little bit today. Yunifer dismisses her dad's panic, wheezing out a reassurance that she simply overdid it a little bit today. Her dad's expression immediately darkens as he looks at her exhaustion, instantly blaming Ishid and bitterly cursing that indolent bastard in his mind. Brushing past her fatigue, Yunifer pivots the conversation, telling him that her physical state isn't the important part right now. She drops a massive bomb, brightly announcing that she is officially going on a military campaign. Her father nervously echoes her words, desperately praying inside his head that it isn't what he is currently thinking. Yunifer confirms his absolute worst nightmare, cheerfully clarifying that she is joining the hazardous monster suppression campaign. Giggling, she explains that the Order of the White Knight deploys every quarter, and she just decided to participate this time around. Confused, her dad points out that she has never shown a single shred of interest in dangerous field campaigns before. Yunifer just playfully chips back, cutely murmuring that she just happens to find it interesting this time. Staring at his clueless daughter, her father's blood absolutely boils, as he mentally pictures driving a sword straight through Ishid's face for daring to put his precious daughter in danger. He furiously clenches his fist in pure silent rage. Catching himself, his fist suddenly loosens as he bitterly reminds himself that he doesn't even have the right to stop her. Hiding his face, he coldly tells her to go on her way if she has finished saying what she came to say, turning his back on her. Yunifer stands frozen, watching his sudden departure with a deeply somber expression. Pausing right before he leaves, her father finally drops his cold defense when Yunifer quietly confesses that the truth is, she is sad.